Who would have thought priests would be caught dead digging around in a dump like this? But that's exactly how our story kicks off. Two guys in robes hitting up a garbage heap on some serious business. One of them was pissed that their orphans with abilities were being snatched up. They walked past this big, shady-looking bag that suddenly started twitching. The priest yanked the cloth off and found a girl passed out cold inside. But she was radiating some serious power, and both guys knew she was something special. They were so stoked about finding her, they almost did a jig right there. It was like Christmas come early. The girl started waking up, and all the noise around her seemed like one messed-up alarm clock. Her name's Aisha, and they took her back to the monastery, where they gave shelter to a few other orphans. Just in time for a super thrilling lunch of compote and a stale chunk of bread. Aisha gnawed on the bread with a sour look, but not because she was afraid of breaking a tooth. She had her own reason, one she didn't want to share with anyone. There was a commotion outside, and then she spotted two shadows lurking by the window. Curiosity got the better of her, and she went to look. The kids told her they'd sold someone else to the nobles again. This time, it was a boy with the power to purify the air who got the short end of the stick. Another kid, seeing how pissed she was, reassured her that she'd be next, since she had the most power. But that wasn't what was bothering her, and the kid figured the problem was the food. Aisha's mood just kept getting darker. It looked like she was about to lose it. And then she just let all her emotions out in one long, loud scream. The truth was, she used to be married to the main character of a romance novel. Not yet, but after she died, she got transported into the novel and landed this role. The novel she was reading is called Lotus Blooming in the Mud. It was a new release in the online library, and it was blowing up fast. In her past life, the girl lived in a tiny room, always hustling with side jobs. And in her free time, she escaped by reading romance novels. In those moments, she'd just zone out, completely detached from her body. In the first half of this novel, the saint, Aisha, bites the dust. The main characters also included Aisha's ex-husband, Crown Prince Mercedes, and Sophie Wren, a saint candidate and Aisha's close friend. Those two started getting cozy, but memories of Aisha kept haunting them. Even the color of the Mercedes reminded him of his ex-wife's eyes. Up until now, our heroine had been holding back because she hated to waste money. But then something happened that finally broke her patience. One of the novel's characters, Duke Bastion's son, died at the age of 22. A lot of unexpected deaths started happening in that family for no reason. But the people of the Empire didn't think much of it. Only Sophie sensed something was off. She told the prince she felt traces of a massive explosion. It was some kind of different energy, but similar to what happened when Aisha died. Sophie's also sure that Aisha didn't die just because her powers vanished. There were too many of them, and they couldn't be contained within one person's body. All that stress is what led Aisha to her unfortunate demise. And right then, as Sophie and Mercedes were talking about it, their eyes locked. Without even thinking, they took a step towards each other, because they were both on the same page. But it wasn't anything inappropriate. They just both wanted to uncover the truth about Aisha. Our girl totally lost it at that moment, because that's not what she was expecting at all. She was rooting for them to get together and was dying to see them kiss. Her emotions exploded, and in a fit of rage, she threw a book at the wall, but it bounced right back. The corner of the book smacked her right in the forehead, and she passed out cold. And then she found herself in the body of little Aisha, the saint. And according to the original story, she's supposed to die young because of a power surge. At first, she couldn't tell if she was dreaming or if she'd really been reborn. But she knew one thing: she wasn't ready to kick the bucket. So, the girl decided to pull out all the stops to survive, as long as she was stuck in this world. What should help her is that the novel's prologue laid out a way to make it through this mess. The only option was to marry Duke Bastion, a direct descendant of a demon. His magical power could keep Aisha's overwhelming holy power in check. But to marry him, first she had to escape the temple where the priests had dragged her. She had an idea and asked the boy, Tom, if he had any ink left. When he said yes, the girl asked if she could borrow a little bit. Aisha cooked up a scheme to ensnare Levi Bastion and get him to the altar. Just then, Levi, who was still a young man, felt an itch in his ear and figured someone was talking mad smack about him. A little later, Father William was heading towards her room, moving fast. They told him Aisha was sick, and he didn't believe it, so he came to check it out. The girl was indeed lying pale in bed, with two servants clucking over her. They begged the priest to take a look at the poor thing. She was having trouble breathing, and she had a really high fever. They also showed him red spots on her arm. The servants were scared, wondering what the rash was from. The next moment, Aisha coughed, bringing up red fluid, and William worried it was the plague. All three priests jumped back to the door, not understanding how someone with such immense power could get sick. Catching the plague back then was the worst thing imaginable, so the priests were shaking in their boots. Aisha seized the moment while they were huddled in the corner and pounced on them like she was possessed. Man, you can't even describe the high-pitched screams and the look of pure terror on their faces. Then William, covering his face with a handkerchief, ordered them to get rid of her before anyone else got sick. That's exactly what the girl was waiting for, since that was her escape plan all along. Soon, they wrapped her up in rags like a mummy, and two attendants in makeshift protective gear carried her deep into the woods, where they dumped her in a pile of muck. And now the plan didn't seem so brilliant anymore. Even the priests felt a pang of regret that she was going to die. They were hoping to raise her and sell her for a bigger profit. Aisha waited until they were as far away as possible, then started tearing the rags off herself. She could still taste the nasty ink she had to drink in her mouth, 'cause that was the only way she could fake a bloody cough. But the worst seemed to be over. Now all she had to do was get out of the woods and find Duke Levy Bastion. What seemed kinda easy at first turned into a whole different ballgame once she got a feel for the night forest. Besides the thick, dark trees, wolves roamed here, and they'd just found themselves a fresh target. But at the last second, the pack leader totally switched up and just sat down in front of the girl. And suddenly, these beasts didn't seem like predators anymore, just like a bunch of cute puppies. All the wolves started licking her face at the same time, like loyal little doggies. The thing is, because Aisha was so crazy powerful, pretty much every animal loved her. No matter how savage a predator was, it'd come up to her all friendly, wagging its tail. The biggest of the wolves had some gnarly scars on its face, and Aisha figured he was the leader. So she asked him if he knew where Duke Bastion was. The wolf got all tense, and the girl realized he knew this guy pretty well. Then the beast started contorting, twisting its body to resemble a demon it was seriously afraid of. And when Aisha realized it knew where the Duke was hiding, it howled to let her know she was right. Then the girl hugged the wolf and asked it to take her there. The wolf was really not feeling that idea, but it agreed anyway. Aisha climbed onto its back. That way they could get to the castle way faster. And soon, a luxurious estate came into view. The place Duke Bastion called home. They were part of the royal family, but for some messed up reason, the castle was on the outskirts of the capital. Aisha could only figure they'd been kicked out for being total jerks. And before going any further, the girl thanked the wolf for its help. The other wolves came up to her too, hoping the saint would give them some head scratches. They were practically begging her with their eyes not to go in there. But Aisha didn't have a choice. Just then, a man appeared behind her, totally surprised to see animals gathered with a human. It was Wolfgang Bastian, and he wasn't happy someone was wandering around his place without permission. First, a crazy shiver ran down the girl's spine, and her hair practically stood on end. Turning around, Aisha wanted to say something, but she was speechless when she saw how gorgeous he was. She couldn't even figure out how a hottie like that could be a background character. She snapped out of it when Wolfgang asked her to introduce herself. The girl gave a respectful bow and told him her name. Then the man wanted to know if she even realized where she'd wandered into. She just said in a quiet voice that her future husband was here. For a second, the young dude was totally stunned, 'cause that was a weird thing to say. But then his face twisted up, and he figured the girl was just messing with him before she tried to off him. She immediately shot back. I mean, she really did look harmless. Plus, Wolfgang found out she was 9, and he figured, no way this little thing can hurt me. Then he checked her out, head to toe, and suggested they ditch that straw mat she was wearing first. The girl refused. That suggestion felt totally out of line to her. The Duke didn't repeat himself. He just reached out and yanked her headscarf, trying to pull it off. He realized she'd run away from some kind of temple, and he was curious where it was. Suddenly, they both felt a surge of energy crackling in the air. The girl's power was pouring out from under her headscarf, just gushing out of there. Usually, in cases like this, the kid gets taken to the temple right after they're born. Aisha sensed Wolfgang's power too, and figured he knew about hers. Now it's obvious she can't hide that she ran away from the temple, so she begged him, asked his lordship not to send her back to that place. But Wolfgang knew that temples often let kids, especially special ones, go without. He felt bad for the little girl with the sunken cheeks, and he scooped her up in his arms. The next thing she knew, the wind was whipping her face, almost blew her headscarf right off. Looking around, Aisha saw they were flying over the ground. Not too high, though. Still, she got scared and clung tighter to the Duke so she wouldn't fall. And the buildings started getting bigger real fast as they got closer. Aisha was scared she'd screw it all up, now that she finally had a shot at surviving. Up on the roof, she saw some dude yelling his lungs out. He was freaking out about some young hotshot ignoring his pleas to not go flying around. But it was all good. The landing was actually pretty smooth. The screamer was Wolfgang's assistant, Benjamin, and he figured his lord had slipped out the window again. Though Duke Bastian himself wouldn't exactly call it slipping out. Still, the assistant begged him not to do that, or he threatened to quit. But the Duke just held out a ring with a huge diamond, saying he'd found it on the road. He runs into stuff like that all the time on his walks, and he drags it all home. Benjamin looked at the girl and realized she was another stray he'd picked up along the way, and he was floored when His Grace introduced her as a potential bride. While he was still trying to wrap his head around that, Wolfgang hurried the young guest toward the house. Aisha kept trying to pry out where exactly they were headed, but the Duke kept mum until they reached a spacious room. It was super bright in there, and the gold-trimmed decor looked seriously lavish. Setting the little one down, the Duke called for the butler, Hugo, and he showed up instantly, like he was just waiting to be summoned. Wolfgang ordered him to bring some food for the little lady and a warm blanket. Hugo figured the kid was freezing and promised to get a fire going in the fireplace too. The girl couldn't believe that the Duke was showing her such kindness, even before he knew her. He probably only did it because she looked super pathetic and played it up, saying she was catching a cold. That surprised the Duke, because with her strength, she shouldn't even be able to get sick if she took a dip in freezing water. A minute later, more servants knocked, and the girl's eyes went wide when she saw what they brought. A small rolling table was practically buckling under the weight of all the different dishes. Aisha's mouth immediately started watering from the amazing smells coming off of them. Right then, the maids wrapped her in a soft blanket and offered her some comfy slippers. Aisha suddenly felt so cozy and nice, and she thanked them with a shaky voice, all flustered. Then they sat her down at the table, and the caring host told her to eat up and not worry about a thing. The girl didn't get why they were bundling her up when she wasn't even gonna get sick anyway. Even though it's not complicated, she still feels a chill, you know? This kindness felt off, though. Nothing's that sweet in this world without a catch. The first thing that came to mind was that the Duke actually saw her as a daughter-in-law. But after trying the first dish, she screamed like crazy, saying it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. And then she called him her future father-in-law, which definitely threw him for a loop. The girl reminded him that he'd already called her his daughter-in-law before, so she believed she had a shot at it, even imagined what it would be like. The Duke just sat there for like 5 minutes, watching her get hyped about something that hadn't happened yet. From his reaction, the kid realized something was up. Wolfgang straight up said she couldn't become his son's bride. She thought she must have misheard and asked him to repeat himself. That's when Aisha realized the cruelest torture in the world is false hope. In despair, she slammed her face into the table, nearly knocking over her food. Now she didn't even want to eat. She was terrified of what the future held. Wolfgang found the little thing's reaction amusing, so he decided to tweak his decision a bit. He explained that she still had a shot at getting her wish. His words were like sweet medicine to her ears, and she was overflowing with hope again. But she crashed back down when she learned that the chance was really, really slim. She couldn't understand why the Duke was acting like he was ready to set up the wedding, then immediately build a wall. Then she remembered the rumors. Duke Bastian, who rules the impenetrable fortress, he's just like his master, who they call a demon, or the devil himself. Even the name of the duchy is intense, Monster's Dam. It's the northernmost part of the continent, bordering the Forest of Grief. And it's the only place where monster outbreaks happen. Because of that, the nights were clashing with monsters overflowing the place every single day. The land became isolated, but stronger than anywhere else on the continent. Duke Bastian himself was known as a monster slayer because of his strength and skills. But even with that terrifying reputation, Aisha wasn't about to give up so easily. She raised a finger, all proud and warning-like, and declared that His Grace would seriously regret letting her go. She was dead serious, but the Duke found it hilarious and asked her to explain. The girl racked her brain, trying to come up with the most convincing reason. But all she managed to say was that she was super strong and really cute. Just in case, she also added that she was younger than the Duke's heir, which surprised the Duke again, since his son Franz was the same age as her. He was also surprised she didn't know her future husband's name, but he was talking about his second son. But that didn't bother her at all. She boldly declared that her brother-in-law was also a contender. But she wasn't really thrilled about that, since she wanted to be the first daughter-in-law. Wolfgang laughed a bit more, and then sent her to the maid's room. And she thought that was weird, because in romance novels, the father-in-law isn't supposed to act like that, acting like she was paving the way for her daughter-in-law with roses. Instead, she ended up in a dim little room with just a stool, a table, and a hard bed. Knowing there was nothing Aisha could do about it right now, she just dropped her head onto the pillow and decided to come up with another plan while she still had time. Originally, the saint became the crown princess at 14, and then her power just exploded. And that's when Aisha started wondering what would happen to the actual blooming if she could somehow suppress her power with the magical force of the bastion. Blooming signifies the wild, untamed flourishing of powers when you reach god level. And usually, the gray-haired cardinals would debate whether to bloom multiple times or not. So the fact that a girl of 14 was in full bloom was a total game changer. But since the story wasn't exactly lining up, the girl had no clue how her powers would develop. And she still clung to the hope of marriage, just to be sure she wouldn't end up 6 feet under. So, she needed to figure out a way to snag young Bastian as her husband. Because if she really blossomed, tons of people, including the royal family, would be after her. And the only thing that can keep those kinds of powers in check is the super strong Duke Bastian, the devil himself. Aisha pictured them together already, her future hubby looking after her, and her complaining to him about all the bad guys on her tail, and then him promising to take care of everything. But for now, that was just a pipe dream, and her reality was a dusty room with cobwebs in the corners. Still, she wasn't bummed, because she managed to stay the night at the estate, and they didn't ship her back to the temple. And the next day, she put on the maid uniform they'd whipped up for her overnight, and she dashed down the hall, ready to win the Duke over. She only stopped at his door, took a deep breath, and put on her game face. First, she gave a soft knock, just to announce herself. Then, she confidently opened the door and stepped into the spacious room. The first thing she did was yank open the heavy curtains, letting the sunlight flood in. Wolfgang was still out cold, lost in dreamland, when Aisha greeted him. Cracking open his eyes, the Duke couldn't even process what was going on at first. And the girl, flashing him a full-toothed grin, called him father again. Her behavior really did seem pretty bold, but she needed to win over the head of the house. The Duke was still scratching his head, trying to figure out if he was dreaming. Aisha grabbed his arm and started yanking him out of bed, saying it was way past 9 in the morning. Wolfgang just watched her trying to drag this heavy dude. Then he noticed she was wearing some weird clothes, and Aisha explained the maids had sewn them for her. Right now, she was happy even with this little dress, 'cause she didn't own a single thing. Back in her old life, she lived for getting compliments on her sweet personality. She had a strong and flexible body, which totally won over all the aunties back in Korea. And now, she was doing a killer job, winning over the hearts of everyone in the estate. Every single person was head over heels for this adorable little thing. Now all that was left was to win over the lord of the castle himself, who was still kinda clueless. And Aisha flashed him that saintly, charming smile she'd been practicing all morning. Wolfgang didn't compliment her, he just compared her to a puppy. But the girl wasn't offended at all. On the contrary, she took it as a sign of affection. Then, the Duke wondered who helped the girl prepare for such reckless behavior. It turned out to be the butler, Hugo, but Aisha begged him not to punish him, because the old guy was innocent, and the girl herself made him do it. She also learned that the servants preferred dirty work to waking up the Duke, because he's always in a foul mood every morning, and they've even broken a few cups from fear. So Aisha thinks the Duke's partly to blame for their fear, and asked him again to get up. Realizing she wouldn't give up, the Duke got up, swaying slightly, since he wasn't fully awake yet, and the girl decided he had low blood pressure and took his hand to support him. Wolfgang wasn't really tracking what she was after, figured she just wanted a piggyback ride. Then he hoisted her up with one arm, showing off his strength, hoping to indulge her childish whim. Aisha barely managed to grab his arm tighter, so she wouldn't eat the floor. He just assumed she wanted to mess around, which she immediately denied. Explaining she just wanted to support him, she asked him to put her down. But the Duke kept holding her up like that, thinking it was hilarious. Then he asked about breakfast, and Aisha piped up that she was just about to suggest it. And when Wolfgang finally set her down, she asked where he preferred to eat breakfast. Except that's not what the Duke meant. He wanted to know if she'd had breakfast. She admitted she'd just had some cookies, and Wolfgang immediately gave her grief for it. "This ain't food," and I told the little one to hang tight for like half an hour. Then I bounced, leaving her scratching her head, wondering what I was up to. The Duke hit the bathroom to change. Gotta be ready to chow down, right? Next thing, I called Aisha to come with me, and we trekked halfway across the estate, or at least it felt like it, to the dining hall. Seriously, this place has more stairs than sense. The kid was already feeling it in her legs. And then, bam! We walked into this dining hall, and it was as huge as that whole temple she used to live in. Right off the bat, the Duke chewed out the butler about some useless dish he'd made, and the girl started apologizing to Hugo, saying she felt bad he got yelled at because of her. Then Wolfgang sat Aisha down at this massive table, just for the two of them, and before you know it, they're bringing out a whole spread of mouth-watering meat dishes. Aisha paused for a sec, looking around, and all sorts of questions popped back into her head. This table was huge, easily big enough for 50 people. Then, totally serious, she says it tastes way better when the whole family's together. Wolfgang knew she was talking about his kids, and the girl admitted she knew a thing or two. Specifically, that her future husband is at the academy, and his brother's at the Bastion estate. The mystery of her knowledge was simple. She pumped the maids for info, and the Duke, with a sweet smile, said that the family secrets were pilfered before noon. Aisha was thrown off by him, saying such weird stuff with such a friendly face, but she figured it was just the first, clumsy attempt to resist her charm. And if things keep going like this, she'll have the whole bastion eating out of her hand in no time. The little one's joy was cut short when wolves suddenly burst in, smashing the window. First, they barked. Then they leaped to the far end of the table, like they were waiting for a signal. Some were still whimpering, but they weren't really showing any major aggression. And then, all at once, they howled, letting everyone know they were starving. This whole thing totally freaked out the little girl, though. The Duke shot up from his seat, not understanding what the heck was going on. It all ended peacefully. Aisha convinced the wolves to leave, and in the morning, she gathered some food for them. With a small bag of leftovers, she went to the garden where they were waiting for her. The animals were stoked about the treats. Their bellies were practically glued together from hunger. But the girl didn't give them everything at once. She started dividing it up for each of them. She was calm now, even though yesterday she almost kicked the bucket from fear. Then she told them it wasn't her place, so she couldn't exactly have them over. While the Duke was still reeling from her attitude, she petted each one, so their feelings wouldn't get hurt. And then it clicked for him. The girl just wanted to take care of these critters. Not believing her ears, Aisha crawled closer across the table to make sure she heard right. Then she admitted she loved animals, especially these ones since they helped her out. Still, the kid was worried the wolves would be a problem in the house, since people usually freak out around them. So the Duke suggested they stay on the mountainside, for the safety of everyone in the house. Besides, being wild animals, they'd be better off in nature, and they could even guard the place. But Aisha would be the one in charge of feeding them, personally. So Wolfgang let her collect all the kitchen scraps she wanted. The kid was stoked, like she was getting a bunch of new pets. Back in her old life, she couldn't even afford to feed herself, let alone something else. But now she could take care of them, and she decided to give each one a name. There were 12 wolves in the pack, so she had to figure out what names to give them all. Then it hit her. She knew just what to pick, something easy to remember. Thinking about how many there were, she named them after the months of the year. And while she was patting herself on the back for being so clever, the Duke's aide walked up. He was still keeping his distance, but he noticed the wolves were acting different. He was already surprised to hear the little girl had tamed them, but now he was seeing it for himself. But now he had another reason to approach this little one. He didn't get a proper introduction yesterday, so he'd do it now. The girl gave him her name too, and asked him to keep things casual. After all, she's no high society lady, just a candidate to marry the Duke's son. Even so, she was totally confident she'd win him over. Benjamin found it amusing how sharp she was for someone so young. He couldn't help but chuckle, but the girl understood, since he worked with her future father-in-law. So she figured his line of work probably didn't give him much to laugh about. After that, Benjamin just lost it, laughing so hard his stomach hurt. But Aisha stuck to her guns, glancing at the dark circles under his eyes. The dude kept cracking up for a while, until he was practically crying with laughter. It wasn't until he got himself back under control that he realized he'd been kind of a jerk to Aisha. So he apologized for the laughing fit, but she didn't seem offended at all. She just asked if he knew of any animal that burns through a ton of resources. She wanted to know if there were any creatures out there with higher intelligence than humans. Benjamin was racking his brain, like he was on some tough quiz show, and the little one blurted out, "A lion!" Then, out of nowhere, she asked what kind of soup you make out of a lion. The assistant thought that question was super weird, and then she piped up again with, "The animal kingdom." Benjamin was surprised by the conversation, but it also made him start laughing like crazy again. He was past the point of even being able to laugh, but he just couldn't stop himself from cracking up. Then the girl confessed she knew a whole bunch more jokes just like that one. That's how she won over the Duke's right-hand man, who then wondered why she was dressed as a maid. And her answer, that she was practicing to be a bride, totally fried his brain again. That's when Aisha explained that it was a great way to reel in the future father-in-law. It's a special demure daughter-in-law strategy, which she thinks is genius. While they were chatting, Aisha noticed Joan, the maid, carrying a covered tray. Realizing it was for the Duke, the girl asked if she could take it instead, especially since the butler had given her permission to do whatever her little heart desired. Joan was still surprised, and Aisha pleaded for a chance, since she hadn't managed to have a proper breakfast with the Duke that morning. That little speech totally melted the maid's heart, and she agreed. But she warned her to be careful, 'cause that tray was practically the size of the kid herself. Aisha swore she could handle it, but she regretted saying that, 'cause the tray was seriously heavy. She was grunting under the weight, but she wasn't about to give up on her plan. Turns out, a kid's body just ain't built for that kind of thing. Her hands were shaken so bad, she lost her grip and the whole tray went crash into the floor. Aisha ended up sprawled out right there with the broken dishes and scattered food. But right now, her bruised ego stung way worse than her aching muscles. While she was trying to swallow her pride, Joan and Benjamin were seriously worried about her. Then, the kid heard this weird sound, like a herd of elephants stampeding. The Duke's footsteps were still echoing in her ears. He'd come to see what all the racket was about. He figured out the little one had made the mess, but he didn't get mad. Instead, he picked her up and praised her for trying to do something helpful. The servants got stuck cleaning everything up and bringing a fresh batch, and Benjamin got chewed out just for showing his face, which the assistant didn't think was as bad as slacking off and sneaking out the window. Wolfgang carried Aisha with him to his study, and she was surprised to see so many papers. Now she understood why Benjamin was so winded all the time. While she was turning that over in her head, the Duke called her out on her appearance, said she looked more like a street urchin than a proper bride-to-be, and Aisha apologized. Then she started apologizing for the broken cups, but the Duke told her not to worry about it. I mean, it's just dishes, but they seemed really precious to the girl. Then she glanced at Benjamin, sitting at the next table, and with a look, asked him to come closer. He understood what the young lady was doing and approached, but suddenly he was overcome with anxiety. When he reached her, the little one smiled at him, hoping he'd figure out what she wanted, and he started practically shouting, syllable by syllable, that she looked super cute. The Duke didn't get why his assistant was going on like that and told him to get back to work. And the girl felt a little bummed that this guy gave up so easily, like a trained puppy. Then she turned her attention to the papers that her father-in-law was carefully sorting through. On one of them, she saw the Duke's name and read it aloud. Repeating it several times, she got praised for reading correctly, and she was stoked about it. And as a little bonus, she got a tasty cookie. The Duke just kinda slid it to her without a word, but the girl knew she was supposed to eat it right away. So, thanking the man for the treat, she started chowing down, cheeks full. Right when she looked like a little chipmunk, the guys couldn't help but crack a smile. And she got curious what was so funny about eating a cookie. Still not finished with her own, Aisha reached for the plate, grabbing another cookie, which she also silently held out to the Duke, letting him know he should have one too. And to make sure he didn't even think about refusing, she explained that it's no fun eating alone. Then, like he was a little kid, she asked him to open his mouth and say, "Ah!" Wolfgang was about to argue, but the kid seized the moment and shoved a cookie in his mouth. Judging by his confused look, it was hard to tell if he even liked the sugary stuff. Aisha figured right then and there she'd found her new favorite hobby, which was force-feeding the Duke sweets, and she held out another cookie to him. Once the plate was empty, she happily carried it to the kitchen, grinning like a fool. Still, she couldn't figure out if the Duke actually enjoyed the food. She ran into Hugo on the way and grilled him about it, but he wouldn't give her a straight answer. The girl realized that in this castle, even if you think you know something, you really know nothing. While Aisha was lost in thought about it, the maids snuck up on her and gave her a shove from behind. Naturally, the kid lost her balance and face-planted right into the floor. She didn't cry though, Instead, she turned around with a frown to see who was messing with her. One of the maids said Aisha was so tiny, they just didn't see her. And that sounded like a challenge the little one couldn't ignore. At that moment, she had an expression on her face that made the maids nervous, especially since the next second, the corner of her mouth twitched into a smile, like she was plotting payback. The maids still didn't get what was up with the girl and why she wasn't even crying. So, they decided to bail before anyone noticed what they'd done. But Aisha knew they didn't like her because she'd gotten in good with the higher-ups. Still, she was a little annoyed since she almost twisted her knee. So, as the future owner of the Bastion, she planned to teach those maids a lesson. After a while, she was sitting at the table with them, sipping tea. The maids were acting all friendly, showing how happy they were to be getting along with Aisha. The girl also said how glad she was that they'd taken her in. But then, right away, she added sarcastically that they were doing it while totally hating her guts. The girls froze, like they'd been accused of something awful, and Kim immediately apologized for them bumping into her in the hallway. She was the kindest of the three maids, and noticed the blonde's unhappy look, who didn't get why her coworker was suddenly staring at her like that, and huffed angrily. This maid, Bibi, really did look that pissed, like Aisha had wiped out her entire family. Still, it was a mystery to the little one why this maid was treating her this way. And just like that, the girl totally switched gears, which threw the blonde mean girl for a loop. She announced that the Bastion family was full of seriously handsome guys. Two other maids immediately chimed in, saying no one could compare to their beauty, and if you saw them training, you'd practically lose your mind for a minute. Aisha, though, was talking about facial beauty, specifically the Duke's looks. She thought he was the most gorgeous, and noticed how the blonde suddenly got flustered. The girl kept raving about him, saying she'd never seen anyone more beautiful in her life. The maids weren't exactly on board with that, since they thought he was pretty intimidating. After all, Wolfgang Bastion isn't just a duke. He's got some serious darkness in his blood. Legend has it, the god Lumiere was originally on the side of the Great Dark One, Noir. Then the devil Noir gave up his godhood and chose to live and die as a human. He became the first lord of Bastion Manor in the desolate Winterlands. The reason he did it was because he fell in love with a woman, a regular human being. Her name was Roxanne Bastion, and from that day on, Noir descended from the heavens, and the moment his foot touched the estate, he was no longer called a god. Afterward, the fallen god was condemned by the faithful, and after he came down, monsters started popping up all over the place, like weeds. Nobody was happy about it, and a lot of people got hurt by those monsters. They started holding a grudge against Noir, which led to their demise. But one day, the First Lady of Bastion also passed away for some unknown reason. Nobody knows what happened to Noir himself after that. It's like he vanished into thin air. And that was the most popular theory. There were also rumors that he was buried in a grave with his wife, which is why his magic still works to this day. And they say it's the only place where the monsters of the burning forest live. And now, because of the demon's blood, people instinctively think the Duke is a tough customer and are scared of him. This is the story she told little Kim, when suddenly Bibi got upset. And slamming her cup on the table, she told her not to talk about the master with such disrespect. It ticked her off that someone would talk like that about the Duke, who nobody could even hold a candle to. That's when Kim started getting mad, not understanding why her coworker was defending Wolfgang so much. The little one, seeing the argument starting, figured it was because of her and asked them to stop. She even shed a tear, and the maids immediately started swearing she was completely innocent. Then they pointed fingers at the blonde, claiming she's the one who starts all the trouble. She just smirked, reminding them that they were the ones who suggested messing with Aisha in the first place. The two maids immediately started making excuses, blaming everything on Bibi. But the girl said that even if those two messed up, they've already apologized a bunch of times. And only this nasty piece of work keeps pulling her stunts, and isn't even ashamed of it. Aisha was now demanding an apology from her, while she's still asking nicely. Bibi just twisted her face, like her tongue would fall off if she did it. Her coworkers started begging on her behalf, hoping their apologies would be enough. And they explained that Bibi's just jealous. That's why she's acting like such a jerk. She's jealous because Aisha's gorgeous, and everyone's always fawning over her. Plus, the maids confessed that with spring coming, Bibi's feeling insecure. See, it's almost time for academy break, which means the young master's coming home. And Aisha practically drooled at the thought. But now she gets it. Bibi's got a thing for the guy she's supposed to marry, and she's acting like a total dirtbag, instinctively seeing Aisha as competition. Aisha didn't even want to think about her future husband and that nasty piece of work being together. Soon, the day arrived, when the young master was due back the next day. The butler gathered all the servants, ordering them to stay sharp and get to work. Aisha just didn't get why everyone was so stressed about an 11-year-old kid coming home. They told her that this kid was going to be the next head of the family. Then the butler came up to her, surprised she was up so early, and she explained that she was a hard worker and didn't want to fall behind. Suddenly, she heard a bong behind her and realized it was already 9 o'clock. She had stuff planned for that time, so she said goodbye to Hugo. She'd been at the estate for 3 weeks now, but hadn't made any headway with him. The girl headed back to the Duke's room, throwing the door open with a smile. And then she practically jumped on him to wake him up, which she was already getting good at. Plus, Aisha had learned how to handle the competition like a pro. Like, knowing when that other girl was going to dump a bucket of water on her, she'd just pop open an umbrella. And that's when the girl met another worker named Tony. This guy took care of the horses and cleaned up in the back. But Aisha was always happy to visit him and gave him a sweet smile. The dude was seriously puzzled when he saw how she acted around the wolves. She wasn't just visiting them, she was playing with them like they were normal puppies. One day, Tony asked her how she managed to tame wild animals. I mean, these aren't just any animals, they're ferocious wolves. Aisha couldn't admit it was because of her powers, but she had to come up with something. So, she claimed she had a natural talent for taming any animal. After that, Tony asked her to use it on a mare that wouldn't let anyone near her. In the stables, Quishberry the horse was lying in her stall, looking all glum. The girl went right up to her, started petting her, and asked how she was doing. Then she realized the mare was having a hard time with contractions, 'cause she was pregnant. Horse pregnancies last 11 months, and Queensberry was about to pop any day now. Trying to ease the animal's suffering somehow, Aisha gave her some water to drink. And Tony was grateful to the girl for helping him with this mare. Judging by her belly, a foal should be arriving sometime tonight or before dawn. Aisha herself felt bad watching the horse suffer like that, so she decided to spend the night with her in the stables. Hearing that, Tony tried to talk her out of it, knowing he'd be the one catching heat from the Duke later. But the girl promised it wouldn't happen, and in return, she asked him to put in a good word for her with Wolfgang. Time flew by, and soon it was the dead of night. Aisha wasn't asleep yet, and she was trying to soothe the horse, knowing how much pain it was in. The animal couldn't even sleep because of the pain, so to distract it a little, Aisha lay down closer to it and suggested they just talk all night. She started by complaining that if Queenberry's husband was nearby, she'd tear out his whole mane. She didn't like that this stallion had gone off somewhere on business and left his pregnant wife at home. But then she noticed how the horse's angry face started to change, and she realized that the stallion was handsome and only had eyes for her. He was just busy working. The girl even thought it was really noble of the mare to care so much about her husband. And that's when Aisha remembered she needed to get hitched, like yesterday. The girl was lost in her daydreams when she heard a pitiful whinny. Queensberry collapsed to the ground, shaking all over from pain and fear, which meant a little foal was about to make its grand entrance into the world. Aisha immediately ran around and got ready to deliver the baby. She told the horse to push and rolled up her sleeves, ready to pull. They were both straining like crazy, each doing their part. This torture went on for about 3 hours, and Aisha was drenched in sweat. But then the foal's little legs appeared, and the girl gave them a tug. And along with that wet little critter, she went flying backwards in a heap. She jumped up, stoked that Queensberry had a kid. After putting the little one next to his mom, Aisha went to get Tony. Bursting through the door, she started yelling for him to hurry up. But instead of Tony, she saw 2 massive hooves rising above her head. In that instant, her whole life flashed before her eyes, past and present. Riding that horse was a little kid, and Aisha knew him right away. His face looked evil, especially in the moonlight, and he ordered the horse to stomp. And that was Aisha's first mind-blowing encounter with her future husband. At that moment, teetering between life and death, the girl instinctively threw her hands up to protect herself. Then she heard the hooves clatter away, but she didn't feel any pain. When she opened her eyes, she saw the Duke had taken the horse's kick to the arm. He showed up just in the nick of time, saving the little girl from getting pulverized. All Levi said to his father was that he was back, didn't even apologize to the girl. She was shaking so bad, she just crumpled to the floor, realizing how close she came to kicking the bucket. And to think, she wants to marry this guy, who right now looks more like the Grim Reaper. But then she noticed he was staring at her real weird, like he wanted to take a bite out of her. Her guess was right on the money, 'cause Levi pointed a finger at her and threatened to, deal with her permanently. Reason being, it was the first time he'd ever seen her face around the estate. Plus, the girl reeked of Queensberry blood, so he figured she was trouble with a capital T. The Duke explained to his son that they didn't know yet if the girl had hurt the horse. He even suggested she might have been helping Queensberry instead. The kid thought about it for a sec, then agreed the blood smell on her back then made sense. They both stared at Aisha, waiting for her to explain herself. She was still shaking like a leaf, but swore she hadn't hurt the horse. Just then, Ignite the horse started snorting at her, but he didn't seem angry. Aisha explained that this horse just wanted to see his wife and kid. To back her up, the horse started bouncing around, trying to get his rider off. And as soon as Levi hit the ground, Ignite bolted to the stables at a full gallop. Then, through the open door, everyone could see the horse family reunion. The Duke and his son agreed the kid had come back at just the right moment. Levi confessed he'd arrived early because Ingate was worried, and he'd been riding alone all night. Plus, he felt like he was being followed. But that's not important right now. Aisha was so engrossed in their story, she was practically reaching for the popcorn. Levi also mentioned that the end-of-year ceremony had wrapped up yesterday. Finally, the boy apologized to his father for worrying him with his reckless behavior. But the Duke corrected him, saying Levi also owed an apology to the girl he scared half to death. At the same time, Wolfgang brought her closer to his son, and she just froze with nerves. For a few seconds, Levi just stared at her, hoping his dad would change his mind. But it didn't happen, and the boy apologized. But he glanced at the Duke while he did it. Hoping he wouldn't be needed for anything else, he quickly excused himself. Then he spun around and headed in the opposite direction. Aisha was pissed that his apology was so short and emotionless. I mean, he almost offed her. She yelled that a simple sorry wasn't gonna cut it. The Duke just chuckled behind her, reminding her he warned her about the slim chance of success. Aisha was starting to get it now, but instead of talking, she just burst into hysterical laughter. Wolfgang waited a bit for the little one to calm down and get her head on straight. Then he asked if she was thinking about throwing in the towel, and then her laughter echoed through the courtyard again, only louder and more sinister this time. After a couple minutes of freaking out, she turned to her father-in-law, and she straight up said that quitting wasn't even in her vocabulary. Now the girl was even more determined to win over Levi Bastian. She really thinks she can turn him into a guy who can't live without her. The next day, Aisha went to the garden and started punching the crap out of some poor tree. Benjamin caught her doing this and was totally taken aback. When he asked her to explain, she started ranting about how it was all a setup against her. Then she asked him to read her the study about the connection between Levi's birth and his personality. She learned from the report that he's 11, and his only family is his dad and a brother, who's 2 years younger. The Duke's wife passed away 6 years ago due to complications from pneumonia. Levi, on the other hand, was outstanding in every way, especially fencing. But only the locals know the real reason he's like this, and they usually keep it to themselves. And to get Benjamin to spill the secret, Aisha promised him double the jokes. After that, the Duke's assistant just said the boy was born that way. But the girl still didn't get it and asked him to explain it more clearly. Then she found out that something messed up happened to the young master when he was 4. The boy just stepped on a bird without any emotion and crushed it. Seeing that, his mom and her maid were totally freaked out by what he did. All that was left of the bird was a pile of broken bones mixed with blood and feathers. Turns out it had just fallen out of its nest, and the boy thought he was helping it out of its misery. I mean, birds like that usually don't last long anyway, so he just sped things up. Staring at the dead bird, the kid just couldn't figure out what he did wrong. After hearing that, the only word that popped into Aisha's head was psycho. She couldn't believe a 4-year-old just straight up killed a harmless little bird. And yet, he's so attached to his horse, Ignite. That's when Benjamin confessed that the Duke used to do messed up stuff like that when he was a kid too. But he immediately backtracked, saying it wasn't exactly confirmed. And he suggested she ask Hugo about it, since he's known the Duke a whole lot longer. Aisha was lost in thought. She never would have imagined Wolfgang doing anything like that. But then Benjamin put down his papers and reminded her she owed him a joke. And the girl asked him to guess what a cow sings. Apparently, it's alimony. If a bunch of cows are mooing together, that's basically a class action lawsuit. And after Benjamin had another good laugh, Aisha got ready to head out. She couldn't grab tea with him at the office today. Had some important stuff to take care of. She said goodbye, but promised she'd catch up with him later for sure. The girl booked it straight to the stables to check on her horse. Queensberry was in a good mood, and so were Ignite and their foal. The mare poked her head out as soon as she caught a whiff of her visitor. Then the girl went inside and was stoked to see the foal was already walking around. Queensberry nudged her son with her nose, telling him to say hi to her friend. And when he turned his head to her, Aisha introduced herself and held out her hand. But the little dude gave the girl a weird look, like he was actually thinking. Then, out of nowhere, he just kinda bumped her in the side with his forehead, not hard though. Aisha figured that was his way of saying, hi, and she thought it was kinda cute. She also noticed Ignite was in the stable today, but he looked bummed out. He probably caught some flack from his missus for being gone so long. Queensberry even gave him a nudge to apologize to the little one for yesterday. Aisha told the mare not to be so mad, saying she'd already forgiven the horse. It wasn't really his fault. He didn't have a choice. He was just following orders. Instead of an apology, the girl asked Ignite to give her an honest answer to a question, and she whispered some questions in his ear about the guy he works for. What she really wanted to know was if that little punk was messing with his horse. The horse made it clear that had never happened. He also explained that Levi usually doesn't make him step on people. Aisha wasn't totally buying it, but Ignite swore he hadn't seen anything like that. Then the girl figured the new dad just didn't know anything yet, and she was afraid this psycho would flatten her before her time was up. Guess she had to go to extremes and get the whole story from Grandpa Hugo. But as she ran down the hall, she saw a scene she really didn't like. Bibi, looking all smug, was putting flowers in a vase and humming to herself. She only saw Aisha after the little girl called out to her. I asked her why she was staring so hard, but Aisha just said Bibi looked really pretty today. Still, she wasn't forgetting what a pain this maid could be. Honestly, she figured Bibi would be better off as an actress than working here. But then she decided to test something and announced that the young master was on his way. Bibi's face totally changed, and she started looking around, not knowing which way he'd come from. But Levi never showed, which really ticked the blonde off. She even got into it with Aisha for playing such a dirty trick on her, and Aisha just wondered why she was so into the young master. She was curious if Bibi even cared that the kid was such a handful. Bibi immediately said Levi wasn't her type, and then agreed he was a bit much. But then it hit her. Aisha was deliberately pushing her towards these thoughts, and she snapped again, telling her not to even try to make her give up. The girls were so caught up in their chat, they didn't notice the Duke appear behind them. He called one of them a good-for-nothing. His whisper so intense, it scared the crap out of both of them. Aisha was the first to pull herself together and started to explain everything to her father-in-law. But she noticed Levi behind him, up on the second floor, watching them. The girl stared at him for a couple of seconds, totally spacing out, and then the Duke leaned in and repeated his remark, and she realized he really did think she was useless. Aisha got indignant, but he explained she wasn't doing her duties. The girl still didn't get why he was on her case so hard. She wasn't just sitting around doing nothing. Then I remembered Benjamin mentioning something about tea in the study. It finally clicked. The Duke was waiting for me there, and he's probably pissed I didn't show. 'Cause little ol' me didn't come to feed him cookies like I usually do. While calming Wolfgang down, I noticed Levi was still watching, so I bowed and said hi, hoping he'd come down later or at least say something. But the kid just kept staring at me for another couple of seconds. Then, when I looked up again, he was gone, like he vanished into thin air. I was actually surprised how fast he could disappear. But what really got to me was that he ignored me, which Bibi was clearly loving. I wasn't expecting a friendly greeting or anything, but it still bugged me. She realized she was getting seriously ticked off at this guy for running away, especially after she locked eyes with the kid he almost offed. Still, something about it intrigued her, and a plan for payback was already brewing in her head. Aisha decided to marry him ASAP, then stick to him like glue. And taking off like a shot, the girl chased after him, determined to teach Levi some manners. She tore across the steps and down the long hallway like an Olympic runner. Finally, she stopped in front of a huge closed door hanging on ancient hinges. It was the butler's office, and the girl asked if she could come in. She had a really important question for this guy, and she needed an answer. Hugo invited the little one inside so she could speak freely. Before Aisha asked her question, she laid out what happened that morning. She talked about how she almost bought the farm when the young master tried to squash her. Hugo was genuinely surprised. He figured all the commotion was just because Levi came back early. Then he started asking if the little one was hurt, but that wasn't what she came to talk about. She's curious about a few things regarding the young master, and she confessed she'd heard whispers that the Duke went through something similar as a kid. The butler didn't know exactly what the assistant had told her, but he insisted the Duke's childhood was perfectly normal. That threw the girl for a loop, but she pressed him for details. He added that the head of the house used to act a lot like the young master does now. Then he clarified that normal meant normal by family standards. Anyway, Aisha figured, whatever was going on, the Duke was trying to be a better person. Hugo explained that now he only lops off a hand, unlike how he used to, really mess people up. Then, with a smile, he added that he'd turned over a new leaf after meeting Catherine. That was Wolfgang's late wife's name, and she was the one who managed to change him. The Duke brought that woman here once, just like he did with little Aisha. The little girl found the story fascinating and asked for more. She also thought it was a weird hobby, picking up people off the street and then making them family. But the butler had already gotten used to it. Plus, the Duke calls it destiny. The great destiny of the Bastian family, passed down from generation to generation. Then the butler went quiet, like he was waiting for Aisha's approval. The girl didn't know how to respond, but she felt like she got her answer. And the thing that changes the rotten character of the men in this family is love. Catherine's love helped the Duke straighten up, even if she ruled with an iron fist. She used to say that if there are no emotions, then pain helps to educate. Hugo remembered a moment from the past, when Madame Bastian walked in on her husband, and caught him there, standing over a body with a bloody hacksaw in his hands. And she was furious that he ignored her request to feed the kids first. Giving him a good smack upside the head, she reminded him that family comes first, then his extracurricular activities. At that moment, Hugo glanced at his watch and explained that he had to go, and hoped he was able to answer the girl's question, who was totally speechless. She just realized she'd finally found someone to look up to, and that thought stuck with her all the way until the next day. The next morning, just after dawn, all the servants lined up to greet the Duke. Aisha was standing there with them, yawning every now and then, 'cause she was still sleepy, and when Duke Bastian walked in, all the servants bowed to him at the same time. He wasn't alone. Levi was walking beside him, giving everyone the stink eye. Wolfgang noticed Aisha, who immediately grinned. But the Duke quickly wiped that smile off her face, calling her a good-for-nothing again. He also called her weak-willed, and she was confused, not understanding why he gave her another nickname. But she figured it was because she'd asked him not to be upset. Now that he's walked away, it hit her just how badly she screwed up and hurt his feelings. Wolfgang and his son headed into the dining room. Aisha peeked through the doorway, noticing he was sitting at the head of the table, with Levi on his left. So the girl decided to pick her own spot this time and grabbed a chair. She wedged it between the Duke and his son, right on the corner, and plopped down, looking like she'd just won the lottery. Then she noticed Levi was giving her the side-eye, like he totally disapproved. But she figured he was just shy, which is why he wasn't saying anything. So to get him going, Aisha started winking and smiling at him. The boy just sat there with the same blank stare, like he hadn't even noticed. Even the Duke got curious and leaned in closer, not wanting to miss his son's reaction. When I couldn't take it anymore, I hinted he should at least pretend to notice when someone's giving him attention. So, in this super dramatic voice, like he was doing her a huge favor, he mumbled hi to Aisha. But for her, it was like a total miracle. She was practically breathless. She said hi back. But by then, Levi was already back to staring at his food. Then, they wheeled in a ton of dishes and started loading up the table. Once Levi was cutting up his meat, Aisha was all over him again. She stabbed a piece with her fork and announced it was a little airplane. She was waving it around so wildly that when he turned his head, she poked him right in the face with it. She apologized super fast, then immediately shoved the meat in her own mouth. Levi was confused about the airplane thing, and she remembered they don't have those in this world. Right then, she joked that if he was curious what it was, it'd cost him 5 gold pieces. Turns out Levi was interested, 'cause he immediately started digging in his pocket. But the girl confessed she was just kidding. Turns out he didn't even know the term. But Aisha couldn't really explain what it was, even though she was sure he joked about it with his buddies. The next blow to her curiosity was him admitting he didn't have any friends, so she decided to change the price. Now Levi just had to say her name. Only then would she agree to tell him what an airplane is. But the kid turned away, like he was being forced to do something shameful. The girl even giggled, shaming him for being embarrassed by something so small. She couldn't believe psychos could even get embarrassed. and that cracked her up. But then she felt this incredibly scornful glare on her. Bibi was peeking through the doorway, and Aisha could practically taste her jealousy. But the kid didn't get mad. Instead, she childishly stuck her tongue out to tease her even more. When the noisy lunch rush hit, Aisha went outside. She felt like she'd eaten way too much. Suddenly, she spotted Levi talking to Bibi in the garden and was totally horrified. Hiding behind a tree, she saw the blonde girl hand something to the young master. It was the embroidery she'd made herself, thinking of Levi and planning to give him as a gift. She'd almost put the handkerchief in his hands when he walked right past her, totally blanking her. Even Aisha thought it was a low blow. He didn't even bother to explain anything, and when Levi was gone, Bibi burst into tears, feeling completely humiliated. Aisha felt bad for her, so she went over to see if she was okay. She even put a hand on her shoulder, like a friend, to offer some support. But instead of being grateful, she grabbed the kid's arm hard and shoved her away. I mean, she definitely didn't want to go crying on her rival's shoulder. And then, in a total rage, she announced she was challenging her to a duel. What's more, she demanded Aisha follow her to the backyard like, right now. On the way, she suggested they settle things with a good old-fashioned brawl, and the loser would have to back off from the young master. Bibi was so disgusted, she grabbed the kid by the collar. But Aisha started begging, saying they should talk things out, like she always does. She straight up said Levi gets to choose, not be fought over and then treated like some prize. But that just pissed off the already fuming blonde even more. Still, she didn't get why the blonde was so hung up on Levi. I mean, they're 4 years apart. But if Bibi wasn't backing down, Aisha was gonna have to escalate things. And she told her to give up, or she'd be begging for mercy. The blonde couldn't believe this little brat was acting so tough. And she raised her hand, ready to teach her a lesson right then and there. But Aisha suddenly started whistling some complicated tune, which made her stop. She just didn't understand what was happening, and figured the kid had just cracked under the pressure. Turns out, that was Aisha's way of calling in a pack of wolves for backup. And in like 2 seconds, they were all around her, snarling at the mean bully. Bibi never thought of herself as a coward. But right then, she felt her heart drop into her stomach. She started backing away, tripped, and landed hard on her butt. Aisha just reached out a hand to the wolf, telling Bibi to say hello to her friends. The pack leader, bearing his already messed up face, started getting closer and closer to the blonde. His growl and hungry, evil stare made Bibi almost lose it right there. Then she started bawling, begging Aisha for mercy, and she sounded totally sincere. The wolves backed off, and the little girl thanked them for their help. Bibi, at that moment, looked at her rival like she was some kind of possessed demon controlling the beasts. But then she reached out a hand to the blonde and asked them to just try and get along. She explained that no matter how much they fought, the young master's choice was the only one that mattered. But Bibi, finding her courage again, snapped back at Aisha, who had implied she wasn't good enough for Levi. Whimpering, Hayden admitted that she didn't have a chance anyway, because she was just a servant, so she had no right to even look at the young master. And Aisha seemed to perk up, pointing out that since she knew that, she should just back off. Besides, the little twerp was already feeling pretty confident about winning, and she proudly declared that no matter who she was still going to marry Levi Bastian. Bibi was stunned again, increasingly thinking this girl was totally out of her mind. She even got curious about how she planned to pull that off. Aisha couldn't exactly admit that she was already a pro at this, having risen to the rank of crown princess. All she said was that she had reasons. Reasons that left her no choice. And she told Bibi she was way too hot to be stuck with a guy like him, which the blonde found kinda funny. Not that she ever doubted her looks. But now it was pissing her off that Aisha kept giggling and threatened to smack her upside the head again. Anyway, their talk ended pretty peacefully. All things considered, no bruises. A few days later, Aisha went to the Duke's office, ready to have a serious chat. She started slow, asking why they were raising that kind of people here. Wolfgang thought the question was super weird. He actually thought she meant assassins, but that's not what she meant. She meant his son was practically invisible. And since she's a potential bride, that was a real problem for her. Levi's been locked up in his room for days now, hasn't even peeked his head out. It's been a whole week since Levi got back for spring break. All you ever see is him glued to a book through the window. Except for that one day, he was like a freaking ninja, totally vanished. Aisha even camped out in the hallway all day, hoping to bump into him. But it was no use, and the kid figured she had to try something different. The Duke admitted he'd actually be more worried if his son did go out. Truth is, as long as the boy's in the mansion, he's keeping a low profile. Aisha still didn't get it. Levi's the lord of the manor too, but he's acting like a guest who messed up. Wolfgang just told her not to sweat it too much, but she wasn't letting it go. She was dying to know what happened to him. And then the Duke confessed that Catherine, Levi's mom, died in this mansion. The girl remembered the butler's story about this woman, who died young. She was a strong leader, even better than the people before her, and she accomplished a lot. The little one realized she'd hit a nerve with the Duke and apologized. But it didn't seem to bother him at all. Instead, he started pinching her cheeks. He thought they felt even softer today, and while he was pulling her face skin, she declared that now he had to admit something, that he's totally smitten with her cuteness, which is obvious from how he's acting. The Duke loosened his grip a little and agreed that she really was like a cute little doll. But then he suddenly wondered if she had to become his daughter-in-law. I mean, there are tons of ways to become part of the family, like adoption, for example. Or she could become the Duke's cute little puppy and amuse him every day. The dog idea didn't exactly thrill her, and she asked him not to joke like that. And without thinking, she blurted out that her life was on the line. Wolfgang looked puzzled, and she quickly corrected herself, saying this was as important to her as life itself. That's why she's acting so decisively, as befits the Duchess of Bastion. Still, Aish felt her face getting red, and she left, saying it was too hot in there, and that she needed to go get some fresh air because of it. On the way, she scolded herself for almost inviting disaster with her big mouth. Aisha almost lost it when the Duke offered to adopt her, or turn her into his pet. I mean, her power? That's sacred ground. Hands off! But this same power could also be a one-way ticket to the graveyard. Stopping to catch her breath, Aisha kept telling herself she needed to be extra careful and play her cards right so she doesn't get tossed out on the street. With those thoughts swirling, the girl headed to the stables. There, she confided in a foal that being upfront and stubborn was totally her jam. Queensberry walked up, and the little girl hoped she felt the same way. The horses told her to chill, but she wanted to get everything done before vacation was over. She knew they wouldn't get married in that time, but they could at least announce an engagement. Aishi was so stoked about her awesome idea, she started dancing right there in the stable. But then she heard Tony's voice. He'd just shown up. He told her to chill on the dancing in such a tight space, didn't want her getting hurt. And then he asked Queensberry how she was doing. Aishi got curious. Why was Tony only being so sweet to this horse? 'Cause if he only acts like that with her, the little foal's gonna feel left out. And not just him, Aishi would be ticked off at the unfairness too. Tony took a deep breath and confessed that Queensberry was the lady's favorite horse. Catherine spent a ton of time with this animal. They really clicked. The girl got super interested in learning another little piece of this family's story. Okay, that intel was valuable, even if it was late, and Aisha got something out of it. Levi was so pissed back then because he thought Aisha had hurt his mom's horse. It also clicked that anything about his mother really sets this tin man off. And in this situation, the little lady found a few advantages for herself. She can use this info to get closer to Levi's heart. After that, she started asking Tony what Catherine was like as a person. He didn't stay quiet for long, and with a smile, he said she was a really good woman. Even Queensberry snorted in a way that seemed to confirm what he was saying. Still, it all seemed too good to Aisha, so she decided to ask around to other people. But every servant, to a man, insisted that the lady of the house was a truly wonderful person. The kid just wanted to hear something other than that same old song and dance. I mean, even without getting into family business, you could talk about what she liked, what she looked like. Aisha kept moving and spotted Bibi hauling a laundry basket. That girl always had her own take on things, so Aisha decided to ask her. But she ended up scaring her when she walked up. She was just lost in thought, so the kid apologized, then asked if she could answer some questions. And she just came right out and asked her to spill the honest-to-God truth about the mistress. Bibi was a little thrown, saying there wasn't really much to tell, because there weren't any rumors going around about the madame to begin with. All anyone knew was that Catherine was a former Gaelic viscountess, and she never went outside. But she wore a mask all the time, even on the estate, and nobody knows why. That's all Bibi knew, but Aisha wasn't satisfied. It wasn't nearly enough info for her. So the blonde explained that everyone gave the same answer, because they were scared stiff. Legend has it, whenever the couple had a fight, the madame just blew up and, disciplined her husband. After that, Aisha walked around for 5 hours. trying to shake off what she'd just heard. The idea of the madam giving the Duke a serious beatdown just seemed totally bizarre to her. Though, maybe she was some kind of martial arts master, unbeatable in a fight. And it also seemed fishy to the girl that Catherine died so young, even if they say it was pneumonia. She didn't buy that with the Bastion's insane wealth. They couldn't have cured her. Curiosity was eating Aisha alive, but she was too afraid to ask anyone about it directly. She did have the idea to go undercover and ask around anonymously, though, but she knew they'd see through her quick, so she dropped the whole thing. Strolling along, the little one noticed a window with a light on. It was Levi's room, and she really wanted to peek inside, but the window was too high, and unless she could fly, it was just a pipe dream. Seriously, she'd already tried a ton of ways to get in there, but no luck. One time she tried sneaking in and bam! She got caught in some kind of trap, a sack or something. The maids caught her and told her she wasn't supposed to be sneaking around trying to get in there. Then they just left her hanging there, and no matter how much she yelled, nobody came. The little kid got the creeps just thinking about it now. Still, she's a clever girl and she's not giving up, not even if things get really, really tough. Suddenly, she spotted a pebble at her feet and decided to put it to good use. It was the perfect little tool to get that young master to come outside. Gripping the stone tightly, she aimed straight for his window. The next thing you know, the rock was flying, closing in on its target, and thwack! It hit the glass and bounced right back. The girl waited a bit, but no one even peeked out of the room. So, being the stubborn kid she was, she grabbed a whole handful of rocks so she wouldn't have to keep running back for more. Armed like that, she was sure she could drag that introvert out into the open. Then she started chucking rocks, barely able to grab the next one fast enough. They were hammering on the window like crazy. You'd think it would have shattered. Just then, the window cracked open, and someone's hand snatched the last rock. Aisha freaked, thinking this dude was going to be pissed and hurl them right back at her. But she chilled a little when a kid's head with black hair popped out the window. Holding on to this weird invitation, Levi stepped onto the balcony to check out the little punk. Aisha froze up, totally lost on how to even start explaining. Their eyes met for a second, and it totally tripped her up. The kid's gaze was intense, but she managed to squeak out a greeting. Then, for some reason, Levi just started heading back inside without saying a word. The girl started yelling for him not to bail so fast and to talk to her. She got her act together, and her legs just took off. Then she bolted for a thick tree growing nearby and started scrambling up. The trunk was leaning, but it was still a tough climb to hold on. Grabbing onto anything she could, she begged Levi to wait up for her. But the next thing she knew, she slipped and went tumbling on her butt. Landing right on her tailbone sent a jolt through her whole system. And when she looked up, Levi was gone, and the window was slammed shut. It ticked her off that he couldn't even bother to ask if she was okay. But she decided to serenade him every night until he finally came out. And that's exactly what she did, starting with her singing outside his window. And when her throat got sore, she'd go back to chucking rocks at the glass. And get this, she even called on wolves to help her out and howl in chorus. But 2/3 of the way through summer vacation, she vanished, and the Duke got the report that she was missing. According to the maid in the next room, no one's seen the kid since sunrise. Wolfgang decided to start searching immediately and used his X-ray vision. He scanned every room, even the outside of the estate. The little one was nowhere to be found, and the butler suggested putting out an all-points bulletin. But the Duke refused. He figured Aisha wanted a specific person to find her. In the morning, Levi looked out on the balcony and saw a pile of rocks mixed with candy. He was even surprised she managed to gather so much in just a few days. The only thing was, Levi couldn't figure out what it was all for. Pretty soon, the whole estate was searching for Aisha. Servants, even knights, were getting involved. Bibi was helping too, and she realized she actually felt sorry for the poor kid. Even so, she was still ticked off at the girl for causing all this stress. Levi watched the commotion from the balcony and couldn't remember the place ever being so loud. Then he remembered a similar time, back when his mom was still alive. She'd decided to play a treasure hunt one time, and when she wanted something, she wouldn't let up. But after she got sick, her drive to accomplish things got even stronger. Like she didn't want to have any regrets before she passed on. During the treasure hunt, she told them to look carefully, because it was really well hidden. Franz was just a little tyke then, but he could already walk and was searching with his dad. And the butler was trying to pry the location of the hidden stash from Queensberry's horse. But Levi just stuck by his mom like he couldn't care less. He just didn't see the point in looking for them. That's why he bailed on the whole thing. Katrin wanted to cheer him up, get him to loosen up a little, so she told him he'd make her day if he joined the treasure hunt. That's the only thing that got the kid to haul his butt off the bench and go look for the loot. Levi Bastian's world quickly became all about books, both regular ones and dictionaries. And his education was built step by step, like a sandcastle in the desert. From early childhood, he was taught to act, knowing right from wrong. So he didn't think it was right to step on an injured bird, even to put it out of its misery. Turns out, his mom was the first person he made an exception for. Levi didn't choke her out, 'cause she was hacking up a lung. Instead, he wrapped a warm shawl around her so she wouldn't catch a draft. Katrin gave him a sweet smile and said there was still hope after all. Hope? That's a tough word for Levi. For once he understood what it meant, correctly. 'Cause when his mom said it, she looked happy. That day, he even won at treasure hunting. And he liked her smile, even though she was trying to hide it. Back then, his mom seemed really happy to him. Then one of the servants yelled from behind the bushes, waving Aisha's apron around. The others huddled up, freaked out that something terrible had happened to the girl. There were tracks leading towards the mountains, so they decided to send out a search party. Levi saw all this too, and for some reason, he decided to take action. In a flash, he jumped off the balcony, like he teleported in that direction. Meanwhile, Aisha had been sunbathing on her wolf mattress for so long, she'd dozed off. In her sleep, she mumbled, begging her future husband to just once open the freaking door. The boy crept up super quietly and was a little surprised at how sound asleep she was. The wolves caught his scent immediately and started snarling, keeping him away from their mistress. The slight commotion still made the girl wake up, and she started rubbing her eyes. Standing a couple of steps in front of her was a totally stunned Levi. And Ice was right there, wondering why he was sneaking around. But then it hit her that it was Levi in front of her, and she thought she was hallucinating. So, to check if it was a dream or just a crazy fantasy, the girl reached out and pinched his cheeks a little. Since he felt solid, Ice knew it was real, but she was still in shock. And then a smile spread across her face, because the one she'd been thinking about had found her. She showed her joy with a hug, throwing her arms around Levi's neck. But what made her even happier was that this untouchable guy was finally in her grasp. She was bursting with excitement that her Levi dream had come true, and she'd managed to snag him. The boy himself wasn't enjoying it. On the contrary, he was creeped out. He shoved Aisha so hard she went flying, and without wasting another second, he bolted. Just took off running. Aisha ended up going home bummed, mostly 'cause who knows when she'd see Levi again. As she walked under his balcony, he tossed her down a small blanket. The girl didn't quite get it yet, but figured she'd wrap up in it just in case. Then she noticed Levi's bedroom door was open, and she realized he'd thrown the blanket so she wouldn't be cold. Her heart skipped a beat realizing that this guy was changing. She started yelling happily about how warm she felt because someone had thrown her a blanket. And then she added that, to be completely happy, she just needed that someone to take her hand. Aisha stood under the balcony, hand outstretched, like she was waiting for a miracle. But when she saw nothing was happening, she switched tactics. She started coughing, pretending she was catching a cold and feeling worse. It worked! The kid bolted from his hiding spot and jumped off the balcony. The next thing you know, he grabbed her hand. Just wanting her to feel better, he started rubbing her palm to warm it up, begging her not to be sick. Aisha herself felt her legs wobbling, but she held it together and thanked Levi. Then he asked about the little girl, all wrapped up in the blanket. She was actually curious why he was suddenly so interested in her name, and Levi reminded her that she promised to tell him about the plane if he called her by name. The girl introduced herself eagerly, seeing it as a chance for them to hang out for a while. She also explained that meeting each other automatically made them friends, so they could be casual with each other, 'cause that's what friends do. Then she asked him to follow her, so she could explain what an airplane is. After drawing a rough airplane shape in the dirt, she gave him a quick rundown of how it gets off the ground. She couldn't help but notice how fascinated the kid was by the marvels of modern civilization. Aisha decided to use this as an opportunity to, let's just say, influence his thinking. Next, she started talking about marriage, when a man and woman decide to tie the knot. And after 2 hours of chatting, she wrapped it up by saying that marriage is a really great thing, because the world of a loving couple becomes brighter and more beautiful. Aisha was really pushing the whole, we should get married thing. But Levi was totally wiped after that never-ending lecture. Seeing he was about to pass out, she suggested they go check out her hideaway. Of course, she meant a love nest. But she had to get Levi interested somehow. By then, it was late, and Aisha was actually enjoying the moonlit walk. Then she led him to this shack, claiming it was her secret hideout. Usually, she just hangs out there with the wildlife, but now Levi was a welcome guest. She was a little embarrassed that it was so bare and admitted she wanted to fix it up. Levi didn't get why that involved him, but hey, it was their hideout now. Aisha even suggested building a separate little den where they could also hang out. The kid didn't quite get the whole picture yet, but he was definitely intrigued. It was a first for him, having a girl actually get under his skin like that. He laughed for the first time in ages and actually held hands, becoming friends with someone. He even asked her name for the first time ever when she briefly disappeared. And now they were chopping wood together. Well, Aisha was doing the chopping, and Levi was catching the logs. The girl was even happy that her lumberjack skills were finally coming in handy. But Levi, seeing her smiling while gripping that axe, even thought he might have bitten off more than he could chew. However, after a little more time, the little house started looking way more cozy. Looking at it, Aisha suddenly expressed regret that they were going to have to part ways. After all, they even built a house together. But now destiny is pulling them apart. Because Levi's got to head back to the academy tomorrow. The kid didn't know what to say. Going to school was just normal for him. But the little one grabbed his hand and asked him not to fool around while she was gone. Before he left, she told him to eat well. Something stirred inside Levi, and he gently stroked her hair. But the next second, he grabbed her and clapped a hand over her mouth, telling her to keep it down. Then he whispered in her ear, barely audible, that they needed to get back home. Somehow, the boy knew that hired guns were closing in on the estate. Levi put the girl on the wolf's back and told him to step on it. Then he smacked the beast on the rump, and it took off with Aisha towards the estate. Aisha just realized Levi sensed some kind of danger. But what actually happened was still a mystery to her. When she rode up to the gates, the knights were already preparing their weapons, and Wolfgang was ordering everyone to get ready quick and be on their guard. Seeing the little one, the Duke was glad she finally showed up. And he told her and his son, who suddenly appeared next to her, to get inside, quick. Levi immediately stated there were a lot of enemies, which is exactly why the Duke was herding the kids into the house. But before they left, Wolfgang knelt down next to the little one and showed his son that her body was the size of a pea, and if she got even a scratch, she might not make it unless someone was there to protect her. The kid knew what his dad meant and squeezed Aisha's hand tighter. Then he led her into the manor, his dad grinning as he watched them go. The little ones headed down the long hallway to the safest room. On the way, they heard Benjamin's voice coming from somewhere below. He was hiding under a desk, trying to keep the documents and himself secure. The girl couldn't understand how some papers could be more important right now. Just then, a huge crash came from outside, so loud it felt like the walls were shaking. Levi calmly explained that it was just a regular attempt on their lives. But to her, it sounded more like a full-blown invasion. Aisha wondered why anyone would even want to attack the manor in the first place. Benjamin was being all quiet, so she yelled at him for not explaining anything. But it wasn't that simple. I mean, there are a ton of reasons to go over. Aisha was about to give him an earful again when they heard a crash, even closer this time. And from outside, they could hear screaming about the defense line being breached and needing to protect the estate. Benjamin, his voice shaking, explained that at this rate, the enemies would break through any minute now, though he was certain that the people inside this house wouldn't get hurt. Levi told them both to shut it. He heard someone had already gotten inside. After listening more closely, he figured there were 4 of them. And then he decided to go deal with those intruders himself. As soon as he took a step, Aisha grabbed his arm, trying to stop him. It's dangerous there. He could get hurt. Especially one kid against 4 killers. But Levi yanked his hand away and promised he'd be back, no matter what. The girl started freaking out, saying something bad would happen to him, and wanted to run after him and bring him back. After all, he's her future husband. She can't just lose him. While she was sniffling, Benjamin noticed that nobody else seemed to give a damn about Bastian. But he explained that even though the boy's only 11, he's Bastian, and that means something. Ace still didn't get the risk, like he had a bunch of lives to burn. She doesn't care if he's a Bastian descendant or whatever. A person only gets one shot at life. So she made up her mind to go find Levi before he ended up a broken mess. But just then, the window shattered and someone in camo gear jumped in. For Aisha, that moment of attack slowed down time so much, she could almost make out the tread pattern on his boot. But the next thing she knew, there was a hand reaching for her. It was Benjamin, who managed to grab her just before that boot took her head off. For a second, he felt pretty damn good about his heroic move. But the killer was closing in, and he swung this huge dagger at him, aiming to take his head clean off. Turns out the assistant was quicker than he looked. He did a fast flip with the girl in his arms. And after landing, he hissed, "I'm not the guy you're after, pal!" He even chuckled, like, these hitmen can't even get the target right. The bad guy didn't give a damn. He just wanted to be done with the man and the kid. That pissed Benjamin off, so he jumped up and kicked the jerk in the jaw so hard, he flew back a yard. And I bragged to the little one that I could do even more than that, since I work here. But then they heard a groan from the thug, who was wheezing in pain but trying to get up. So Benjamin put the little girl down and asked her to do something for him. Just as he was about to continue, the killer came charging at him with a knife. Quickly blocking the strike, Benjamin told Aisha to get help. The girl didn't argue and immediately ran off to find someone. Running further down the hall, she saw some maids with pitchforks in their hands. They noticed the girl and explained that it wasn't safe for her to be wandering around alone right now. But the little one yelled that Benjamin was in danger and needed help right away. The girls immediately raced each other to rescue the Duke's assistant. Aisha was actually surprised that this dude got so much attention from people. Only then did she notice Betty nearby, who'd stayed behind to protect the kid. Outside, there was another crash that made the windows shake. Betty scooped up the little one and told her to be quiet, 'cause someone was coming. Then, quiet as a mouse, she darted into the next room to hide. They ended up in the kitchen, where the maid stuffed Aisha in a cupboard and told her to stay put, and told her not to worry, promising to come back for her soon. The girl was left alone in the cramped, dimly lit space, and started praying that everyone in the manor would be safe and sound. As soon as she finished her prayer, she heard footsteps and peeked through the crack. That's when she spotted a guy holding some kind of artifact. Aisha instantly recognized the thing. Looked like a framed mirror, but it was a holy relic. It's got sacred power, forged by the kingdom itself, and the priests running the temple bought it for a boatload of cash. You can use a thing like that for all sorts of stuff. This mirror reveals hidden energy instead of showing reflections. Like, it could sniff out someone's power, even if they're trying to keep it under wraps. The guy noticed the glow and yelled to the others that he'd found what they were looking for. Right then, Aisha started shaking, realizing they were after her. All she could do was pray for some kind of miracle to happen. But then the blade of the thug's dagger flashed as he tried to pierce the closet door. Aisha didn't even realize she'd curled up into a ball and glued herself to the back panel. And the thug didn't understand why his target was moving. Still, he kept hacking at the door, desperate to get to her. The girl clamped her mouth shut so she wouldn't make a sound and kept praying. Just then, she heard someone else's footsteps, rapidly approaching. Aisha heard some kind of crash outside, and no one was banging on the door anymore. Turns out, Levi showed up and took that scumbag down with a single hit. Then he walked over to the closet that the thug had taken such a liking to. And when he threw the doors open, he saw a terrified girl inside. Fear had drained all the color from her face. But seeing Levi, her heart started pounding again. The kid reached out his hand, and she, still trembling, leaned towards him. He helped her get down, but Aisha's legs buckled out from under her. So, the girl leaned on her rescuer to keep from falling. That's when he noticed her hand was bleeding like crazy. Aisha, trying to act tough, said she just got a little scratch by accident. But even trying to convince herself didn't stop her whole body from shaking. Suddenly, Levi remembered something from his past. When his mom hugged Franz, he stopped crying instantly. It always surprised him. But his mom explained that little kids just need hugs. You gotta do it with real feeling, from the heart. She also said that if Levi wants to comfort someone, he should just give them a big hug. And right now, standing in front of him was this tiny, vulnerable person. So Levi hugged her pretty tight, telling her that everything was gonna be all right now. Aisha's legs almost gave out, but this time it was from a different kind of shock. She couldn't believe this hard-ass kid was acting like this. Still, she was super happy, and she hugged him back even tighter. And they just stood there like that, until everything calmed down outside. A little later, back at the temple, the priests were catching hell for screwing up the mission. After all, they were given that sacred mirror specifically for this. They started making excuses, saying they were dealing with some seriously heavy hitters. The boss just blew up again, saying he warned them that this power was like raw energy. And what really ticked him off was that his goons managed to leave a sacred artifact behind. Calming down a little, the dude with the lotus tattoo on his forehead gave another order. They gotta find that branch, or he'll personally send them to the slammer wearing nothing. He even spelled out in excruciating detail what could happen to them in there. The two lackeys swore they'd carry out his command to the best of their ability, and headed for the exit, hearing the priest call them useless piles of garbage. Now they gotta find this magic branch that some chick boosted a while back, even if it costs them their lives. Back at the bastion, they got Aisha changed and rebandaged her wounded arm. Then, together with Benjamin and Levi, they examined the 4 sacred mirrors. Aisha was especially thrilled and whispered their value in her assistant's ear. The price was so high, the guy instantly felt like he'd hit the jackpot. And to make sure nothing happened to such a treasure, he decided to lock it up in the safe right away. But the kid was curious about where the thugs could have gotten these things. I mean, even finding just one is super rare, so she figured someone had to be behind it. Levi noticed the girl's puzzled expression, and it piqued his interest. But he figured her arm was hurting and offered to rebandage it again. Aisha refused, and then he asked what she was muttering to herself. She instantly came up with an excuse, since Levi's leaving for the academy tomorrow. And because he's gotta go, the girl's super bummed. She even started sniffling to sell it, and Levi told her not to cry. Suddenly, her mood did a complete 180. She started buttering him up like a cat and confessed she was craving chocolate. He bolted to the kitchen right away, so fast that Aisha lost her balance and ate floor. In just a few minutes, the kid was back with a massive chocolate cake, and the satisfied little minx even asked for juice on the rocks. When he agreed to that too, Aisha popped the question and asked him to get engaged. It was some kind of mind game, and Levi instinctively said yes. Hearing him agree, the girl totally forgot about the cake. She was so stoked. And when he nodded again, she was over the freaking moon, like she could fly. If she'd known it was this easy, she would have turned on the waterworks way sooner. Levi cut her buzz short, suggesting they get engaged tomorrow morning. Aisha was speechless for a sec, not understanding how he even came up with that. And the next morning, they were prepping the courtyard at the crack of dawn to get the party done. They dressed the girl up like a Barbie doll, and she still couldn't believe they were getting hitched so fast. She even thought she was dreaming. But then Bibi handed her a flower crown, explaining that for someone getting engaged. Aisha looked seriously bummed out. She confessed that she couldn't believe it was real, and she'd only talked Levi into it. I mean, what was I expecting? This is Bastion, where everything's freaking weird. After decking out the bride with flowers, Bibi admitted it looked way better, and a happy Aisha jumped to hug the blonde, thanking her for the help. Then she proudly announced that she was now the younger Duke's bride-to-be. Calling Bibi sis, she told her to wipe that sour look off her face. Aisha asked her to make a wedding gift like that for her, and Bibi forced a smile. The girl liked it, and getting excited, she asked Bibi to make some more funny faces. Wolfgang interrupted their fun, but Aisha was actually happy to see him, and she immediately asked him to fire Bibi, which almost gave the blonde a heart attack. Turns out, Aisha just wanted Bibi sent to art school. That's why we gotta let her go, so she can hit the road without any worries. The Duke just straight up said Aishi's got the say on stuff like this. I mean, running things around here is what the lady of the house does. Aishi's face froze again. Like, the Duke himself just called her the lady of the house. The kid realized she's part of the Bastion now, and she's got a family. And she proudly declared that her father-in-law is official, and she's not just a bride-to-be anymore. Now, Wolfgang's really her father-in-law, and the little one asked him to take care of her. The Duke was all about it, and shook her tiny hand to seal the deal. Then the butler came up and announced that everything was ready to go. And Aishi, grinning from ear to ear, followed the Duke to the ceremony spot. But then, something caught her eye and totally yanked her attention away. Under the arch where they were supposed to get hitched, stood Levi, looking sharper than the prince himself. But Aisha didn't chicken out. She walked right up to him, staring him straight in the face. Once she was face to face, she told him he looked seriously awesome. The kid just stayed quiet, 'cause he was a little shy. And then the girl started spinning around, begging him to check out her look. Levi just gave a quiet, uh-huh, even though he was totally digging it on the inside. Then, Aisha calmed down a bit, stood next to him, ready to pledge her loyalty. After that, all the residents of the estate started congratulating them. Even the wolves were invited, and wearing bow ties, they started singing some kind of crazy chorus. And now the newly engaged couple thanked everyone for coming. Well, then it was time to say goodbye, and Aisha walked Levi to the gate. The girl took his hand with genuine affection and asked him to take care of himself and watch out for trouble. You know, that kind of thing. She also admitted that she would miss him a lot and couldn't wait to see him again. Levi wanted to say something similar back, but as usual, it came out really short. However, he promised to write her letters whenever he could. It wasn't just the kids saying goodbye. The horses even had their own little hoof bump ritual. And then, hopping on to Ignite, Levi suggested to Aisha that they shouldn't wait too long to get married. The girl was stunned with surprise again, but she was really happy to hear it. Levi was being genuinely sincere, and his words were topped off with a sweet smile. Then he rode off, and Aisha and Queensberry watched him go for a long time. The girl never thought her heart would ever flutter like this over the words of some kid. Then she bragged to the horse about how much she liked her wholesome marriage, unlike the relationship between son and father, who didn't even come out to see him off. Yeah, the girl was so happy about the celebration that she only just realized that, and she immediately went to the Duke to give him a piece of her mind about it. Without explaining the details, the girl immediately pointed out his transgression. But Wolfgang didn't see the need, since Levi wasn't going to see him again anyway. Suddenly, there was an unexpected knock at the door, like it was super urgent. The butler came into the study later, apologizing for interrupting them. He had a message from Duke Campbell and held out the envelope. Campbell got rich off an emerald mine that just never seemed to run dry, and by lining the emperor's pockets, he bought his way up 2 ranks, from count to duke. He's basically the opposite of Bastian, the guy who founded our people. Aisha was super curious why this dude was writing letters here, and the Duke offered her the envelope, saying she had the right to read it and find out. The girl could hardly believe it, but she snatched the green thing with the wax seal right away. The Duke reminded her again that as the lady of the house, she had every right to read all the mail. Aisha unfolded the letter, but what she saw made her eyes bug out like crazy. Seeing her face all twisted up, the Duke and the butler immediately started asking what was wrong. Then the girl winked and confessed she couldn't read yet. The Duke realized he'd missed the most important thing and asked Hugo to take the little one away. He wanted to read the message himself now, in peace and quiet. And it struck him as weird that Campbell would send him a letter asking how he was doing, the very next day after the attempt on his life. Like he knew everything and was messing with him. And that really pissed off Wolfgang. A little while later, in the men's dorm at the Rev Academy, the duty officer was doing the morning roll call and handing out letters. It was mostly the usual suspects getting mail. The duty officer practically knew who'd get a letter beforehand. But then he was surprised to see an envelope addressed to Levi Bastian. The delivery guy got curious about who this mysterious sender was. And when he read the name Aisha, Levi himself was super surprised. He snatched the letter from the delivery guy right away, almost ripping his arm off, and immediately clutched it to himself so no one would dare take it. Now, that name sounded like something sacred to him, and a message from her was like a blessing. Seeing the curious faces, Levi stunned them by proudly announcing that she was his fiancée, after which he zipped into his room and locked the door. But even through the wooden barrier, he could hear everyone expressing their surprise that he had a fiancée. But the boy paid no attention to it and began to carefully open the envelope. There was a short but sweet greeting from Aisha on the piece of paper. She actually managed to do it with a huge amount of effort. The girl, her face exhausted, slumped onto the table. The place Hugo brought her to turned out to be a library connected to a bedroom. Before, she kept wondering why anyone would connect those 2 rooms. Turns out it's so she can crash while she's studying. It was tough, but now she can at least write short sentences. And then it suddenly hit her how to create a message in a simpler way. After scribbling something on the paper, she handed Hugo an envelope to send. But 5 minutes later, Bibi burst in, asking why she was let go. She thought Aisha was joking, but it turned out to be the real deal. And Aisha sarcastically reminded her how Bibi always thought she was too uptight. But then she immediately asked if the blonde was enjoying her time as a maid. Bibi thought about it and realized all she had for fun was a mop and some rags. Just then, Aisha pounced on her, saying the Bastians don't need a maid who's lost her edge. So she told Bibi to leave and find her real talent. She even hinted that maybe she could try to do that at Seoul Academy. It's the second most famous academy after Rev, specializing in the performing arts. Plus, Hugo already knows, and Bibi can head over there as early as today. Aisha told her to ace the entrance exams and not even think about coming back. Bibi was still reeling, not understanding why Aisha was doing this for her. The kiddo paused, remembering something before answering. Back in the day, she was a princess, super popular with everyone. But most of the nobles looked down on her, saw her as some low-class nobody. So she ended up with no real power, just the title of saint. And now she's saying she believes in Bibi's potential and investing in her for the future. Because people say people are the best investment, and Aisha thinks Bibi's worth it. So she told her to get successful and pay her back double. That speech calmed the blonde down, and she even cracked a smile. Then the girls sealed their deal like kids, with a pinky swear. As she said goodbye to the little lady, Bibi promised to do everything she could so she wouldn't regret it. After that, she left Aisha completely awestruck. She was genuinely happy that this nasty piece of work had turned over a new leaf. But the good times didn't last, and it was back to the books. Right now, Aisha's main mission is to write a letter to her fiancé. So she started writing, begging him to rescue her before it was too late, saying she was only waiting for him. She finished it off by saying how much she missed him. Just then, she heard her dad's voice behind her, and it scared her half to death. She even got the hiccups. The Duke apologized, saying he just came to check on her. That's when the girl noticed he was all dressed up, even though it was almost dinner time, and Wolfgang just dropped the bomb that he won't be home for dinner tonight. The reason why totally blew Aisha's mind. He's going to meet her mom. And get this, he's taking her with him. The whole thing sounded insane to her, but it also freaked her out big time. It's not like she was hiding anything from the Duke. It's just she's never even met her mom. But this news just turned her whole world upside down. She even started to wonder if someone was just playing a sick joke, pretending to be her mom. Wolfgang was brushing her hair and telling her not to worry, but she just couldn't help it. But the Duke had something else on his mind right now and asked her to take care of her hair, because while he was brushing it, it just got even more tangled. So, the little one showed him the right way to brush those curls, starting from the ends. To the Duke, it felt like he was grooming an animal's fur. Benjamin, sitting across from them, just smiled at the sweet scene. But he had to put on a serious face when the Duke asked him for a ribbon. Then, after fiddling around with his sister-in-law's messy bun, he gave her a cute hairstyle with 2 little pigtails, all tied up with ribbons. The girl loved it, and immediately asked Benjamin to check out her look. She kinda looked like a poodle to him, but he knew better than to say that out loud. So he just said, all polite, that the little lady looked beautiful. Soon they arrived at their destination, and the girl was helped out of the carriage. The second she hit the ground, she heard a woman's voice calling her daughter. And the next thing she knew, some fancy-dressed lady was all over her, like she was trying to crush her. But she hugged the little girl, though she squeezed so tight it felt like her guts were about to pop. The woman started saying she was her mom, but Aisha wasn't buying any of that nonsense. She just reached back for the Duke, hoping he'd rescue her from this death grip. But the guys just stood there, watching the mother-daughter reunion. The woman was still putting on a happy face, acting like she was thrilled to finally find her little one. That's Baroness Maine, and she politely apologized for being a little late. Meanwhile, the common folk watched the aristocrats cautiously, recognizing the Duke among them. The madam kept praising Wolfgang for how he took care of the girl, saying she'd even heard rumors about it. The Duke noticed the crowd staring and invited them inside. The woman with the girl in her arms walked proudly, arm in arm with the Duke. At the restaurant, the waiter immediately showed them to their reserved table, more like a private spacious room with a massive table. Once everyone was seated, the woman started talking, sounding a little worried. But Aisha cut her off right away, wanting to know what the heck was going on. Benjamin jumped in, explaining that rumors had been spreading around the area. The buzz is that young Master Bastian is engaged to this little lady. Everyone knows, from the academy students to their parents. Aisha was curious how the students found out, and it turned out her letter was to blame. And Levi told everyone that the letter was from his fiancé. But we also managed to find out that Madame Manet is actually Aisha's mother. Next, Benjamin briefly explained what this marriage means, considering the new circumstances. But from what he said, it became clear that it would be a family in name only, to maintain appearances. Since her mother's a baroness, they just didn't want to tell the girl right away. The little one's feelings were all mixed up, and she really wanted to believe that this was her real mom. And she asked if the baroness would mind if she started clinging to her. Aisha decided to make the best of the situation, since there wasn't anything she could do about it right now. Then she hugged her mommy, and after kissing her on the cheek, asked her not to forget her, even if she got married. The guys, seeing this, were even happy that these two had found each other. When Aisha got home that evening, she complained to Betty that she was so stuffed she could pop. She also confessed that people were now calling her the Baroness's daughter. She wanted to do her homework now, but the maid told her to go to bed. It's way too late, and the little one can do all her lessons tomorrow. The girl agreed, and they went to their room, while someone was watching them. This unknown person was focused on the little lady in particular. He just couldn't believe that she was young Master Levi's fiancée. More time passed, and the summer month of June arrived. Lately, the heat outside had been brutal, and Aisha was getting worn out by it. On one of those days, while she was hiding out in the house, the maid brought her a letter Bibi sent him, which hasn't happened since the entrance exam. Among other little things, Bibi bragged that the admissions process is finally over. Aisha was happy about the news. She was genuinely proud of the girl. But the maid explained that wasn't all, and the little lady needed to go to the drawing room. Betty wasn't spilling the beans, but she admitted there was an unexpected guest there. The little one kept asking questions, but the maid wasn't budging. And puzzled by the unknown guest, Aisha ran off to see. She even thought there must be some mistake, since no one ever visits her. And just as she was about to arrive, she suddenly slipped and fell flat on her back. A guy in a monocle immediately appeared above her and asked if she was all right. The girl was okay, but she was curious about this new guy hanging around the estate. And this dude started leaning in real close to the girl, like he was trying to see right through her. He got so close that Aisha could see her own reflection in his eyes. Just then, the butler showed up, addressing the guy and calling him Taylor, and asked why he didn't wait for the lady of the house in the parlor, like he was asked to. He started going on about how he just couldn't wait to get a look at Mr. Levi's bride-to-be. Then he suddenly shoved a fist with a thumbs up right in her face and announced that she passed his test, because she's exactly the kind of sunshine the Bastian family needs. But then Hugo smacked him on the back, reminding him that he should at least say hello to the young miss first. And this guy introduced himself as Taylor Dumas, said he owned Lapidum. That's the boutique that belongs to the Bastian family. They always have the hottest outfits for sale, and they're seriously expensive. Taylor's in charge of the men's clothes there, because he thinks they have zero fashion sense. And now he's got the chance to do something way more interesting after his little break with Catherine. Aisha realized this guy was the one who made clothes for the late Duchess, and he just kept bragging about how he even made wedding dresses and tuxedos with his own 2 hands. He said he came here today to take care of Aisha and asked if he could take her measurements. The girl finally snapped out of her daze, figured out what was going on, and said it was okay. Taylor grinned right away, stoked to be working with such a little beauty. Then, without a word, he snapped his fingers pretty damn loud. And a bunch more people walked in, carrying fabrics and all sorts of sewing gear. The second those folks laid eyes on the little girl, they were totally smitten by how cute she was. They started gushing about the dresses they were going to make her, all decked out with jewels. The butler, picturing how gorgeous the kid was going to look, almost burst into tears. And Ice had to deal with those needle-wielding ladies till late in the evening. When they finally cleared out, she collapsed on the bed, totally wiped. Now she understood why you always gotta watch what you wish for. She couldn't even remember exactly how many dresses she'd tried on today. It was easier when she was just nobody. But now she's gonna be a little duchess. She's gonna have to dress the part, you know, for the situation and all. Aisha thought it was a waste of time, but hey, there were some perks. Right now, she just needed to crash and recharge. She was running on fumes. But 30 minutes later, she was wide awake, staring at the ceiling like crazy. The girl figured it was just burnout, but decided to take a little walk. Slipping on her slippers, she decided the garden was the place to be. And soon she was outside, taking a deep breath of that fresh air. She also wanted to check on Queensberry, who was also up this night. Turns out the foal was wide awake too. Aisha walked over and stroked his growing face. After that, he started snorting playfully, showing how happy he was to see her. Aisha loved the sight so much that she immediately kissed his furry nose. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed somehow. Even the horses got more tense. Aisha, thinking someone was outside, went to check it out. And at that moment, she saw those black hooves in her face again. The girl was scared out of her mind again, but realized it was Ignite's legs. Levi was riding him, and when he saw Aisha, he started reining in the horse so he wouldn't crush his bride. For a second, it looked like it was too late, like he was about to leave her with some serious hoof-shaped bruises. And seeing things going south, the little girl braced herself for, at the very least, some broken ribs. Levi managed to stop the horse, though, pulling the reins so hard the poor thing looked like its eyes were about to pop out. Then he bolted straight to Aisha, worried she might have gotten hurt. Right now, she was more hung up on something else: his sudden appearance. Of course, she was happy to see Levi, but she was wondering what he was doing here. He got all flustered and reminded her that she'd written him about how much she missed him. The girl was a little taken aback. She didn't think he'd take it so seriously. The guy just straight up rushed over here, even though the semester wasn't over yet. She was worried he might get in trouble for pulling a stunt like this. She told him to go back, but Levi was determined to stay by her side. His stubbornness kind of appealed to her, and she gave in. Then she threw her arms around his neck, thrilled they'd be together, at least until the Duke finds out and sends him back. Wolfgang found out about the boy's arrival real quick and summoned him first thing in the morning. Aisha came with Levi, knowing her fiancé was about to get a major dressing down. Levi, trying to cover his butt, explained he rushed his exams. That's why he arrived 10 days early. Aisha started backing him up, saying he aced all his tests and got a smack down from the Duke, which made her start crying, and Levi started comforting her, totally ignoring what his dad was saying. Levi's sentence was being grounded in his room for 10 days, which the girl didn't think was a big deal, since she could just go see him. But Wolfgang added that Levi couldn't have any visitors, and that was a real blow to them. The kid immediately started arguing, but it was tough to get his dad to change his mind. That was his final call, and after that, he kicked the little guys to the curb. Levi was feeling pretty awkward, knowing Aisha was suffering because of him, but the girl just calmly took his hand and offered to walk him to his room. The boy agreed, but the whole way there, he was eaten up with bad thoughts. Aisha kept saying the time would fly by, and that she was happy he aced his exams, but then she figured it was because she'd asked him to do well on them. It was clear Levi hung on her every word, but she couldn't figure out why he hadn't replied to her letter. Truth was, Levi sat down to write every night, but he just couldn't do it. He had so much bottled up inside, he just couldn't find the right words. That just made him even cuter to the little girl. Her eyes practically sparkled. And just like that, chatting away, they were at his room, and it was time to say goodnight. Aisha told Levi to come on in, but he was frozen, just standing there. The girl was worried he'd get in trouble, even tried to nudge him, but no luck. He needed to get inside, or his grounding would get extended, like a lot. So she started racking her brain, and remembered them talking through the balcony. It was a solid start, seeing as Levi couldn't leave, and she couldn't go in. The little one clapped her hands together and declared she had a brilliant idea. The next day, they set up a tea table for her in the yard, and it was right next to Levi's balcony, so Aisha could treat him to some cookies. The delivery method was a little unorthodox. She had to chuck him onto the balcony. Turns out, she'd been practicing her throws lately, and she was nailing those cookies. Levi was catching them, not just with his hands, but with his mouth too, like a puppy. He was keeping his girl entertained, and she was stoked he liked the gingerbread. Then she asked the little master to feed her too. The kid grabbed his cookie and chucked it off the balcony. But he overshot it, and the cookie sailed right past her, into the grass somewhere. Aisha told him he needed to loosen up his arm a bit and not throw so hard. That's how they did dates long distance. Aisha would do her homework or just read at that same table, and Levi would just chill and watch her, not bothering her while she studied. One day, Taylor just plopped down next to her and asked her to share her cookies. The girl didn't mind. She was happy to share, and she shoved one right in his mouth. Taylor was so happy that such a cutie was feeding him, he almost started dancing. But then Hugo found him, apologized to the lady, and dragged that old geezer away by the scruff of his neck. Aisha watched for a bit as the butler tried to set the Taylor straight. Then Levi noticed she was lost in thought and asked her what was bothering her. She confessed that she wished she could grow old together with Levi. The boy agreed with her wish, but when he imagined it, he burst out laughing. The little girl didn't get what was so funny, since everyone gets old eventually. But then she got curious about what her fiancé dreamed about. Levi was caught off guard by the question. He realized he'd never actually thought about it, but the girl was waiting for an answer, so he started to stammer, trying to buy some time. And then he admitted that he used to really hate this place, because his mom passed away here, and he was so lonely. But now he loves it, because he has Aisha, and she promised that he wouldn't have to be sad anymore. She's gonna give him only the good stuff she's got. Levi looked sad at first, but then he smiled, trusting that Aisha wouldn't let him down. A week later, the little one went to meet the released prisoner, and when he crossed the threshold, she congratulated him on his release. She brought him a huge slab of vanilla halva as a gift and told him to try it right away, explaining that prisoners eat stuff like this when they get out of the slammer. Levi had almost polished off half of it when Benjamin walked up to them, but he was heading straight for Levi, letting him know the academy had made a decision. And because he's been skipping class, he's facing disciplinary action, makeup work next semester. But he wasn't too worried about it. After all, he's ranked second in the academy. Aisha was hoping for a date, but first, they needed to see the Duke. There, she found out they needed to head to Bastion Estate because of monster attacks. Which was weird, because monsters usually attack in the cold season, and it's summer now. They explained to the girl that sometimes it happens no matter the time of year. Bummer, this means we gotta postpone the wedding. The young master was the first to object to that idea. He suggested we just do the ceremony right now and head to the estate later. The Duke was worried that rushing things like that would be a total train wreck. Levy thought about it for a sec and agreed that putting it off was probably for the best. But then Aisha remembered Taylor already got some killer outfits ready for her, including the wedding dress. So she doesn't have to sweat the clothes thing, even though she's already cute as hell. All that's left is to find Levi the most awesome suit. None of the grown-ups argued, and the little one was back to patting herself on the back for being a genius. But when they stepped outside, they saw everyone was way too busy dealing with other stuff to care. They're scrambling to pack, 'cause we're moving. That's when Aisha realized she was finally gonna meet another person. Levi's younger brother, Franz, who she'd heard so much about. Aisha heard he was a real piece of work, but she was dying to know more. But it turned out Levi, who should know his brother best, claimed he knew nothing. His mood totally flipped, and Aisha couldn't figure out what was up. Then it hit her. He was just jealous, which somehow made him even cuter. To test her theory, she dropped a rumor that Franz was super good-looking. Like, seriously adorable, and she couldn't wait to meet him. While she was gushing about his little brother, Levi just kept walking away. And Aisha realized she'd gone a little overboard praising his little brother. It was pretty dumb to say all that to someone who rushed to her from the academy just because of her letter. So she started apologizing to Levi, knowing how much she'd hurt him. For a second, she was even scared he'd call off the wedding. She caught up to him to see his face, and he was sulking like a little kid. But then Levi took off running, not wanting his bride to see him like that. Now Aisha was feeling awkward, but she hoped she could try to smooth things over tomorrow. But the next day, in the carriage, Levi just sat there silent, not even looking at her. She tried everything to get his attention, even offering him a cookie to cheer him up. But even candy didn't work, while the Duke and his assistant were having a blast watching the drama unfold. Aisha tried again to talk Levi out of being so pissed, but when nothing worked, she broke down crying and admitted she was wrong. It was like someone flipped a switch in Levi. He didn't even react to that. The truth was, he was a mess inside, but he wasn't letting it show. Soon the carriage stopped to take a breather from the long ride. The passengers sighed in relief that this, albeit minor, bumpy ride was over. Stepping out of the carriage, Aisha first scanned their surroundings. Then, a knight offered her his hand and offered to help her down. The girl was just about to take his hand and step down, but she caught the Duke and Levi giving her death glares, warning her not to touch another guy. She jumped herself, ditching the knight for some peace at home, mentally kicking herself for almost doing something incredibly stupid. Wolfgang walked right up and reminded her not to cheat on her fiancé. She wasn't arguing with that, but then she felt Levi's judging stare. The kid was practically burning holes through her with his eyes, not saying a word. But she knew exactly what he was thinking. It didn't last long, just a couple of seconds. Then Levi turned his little face away again. Aisha teased him about being so touchy, even though he's not so little anymore, and it made her wonder if the Duke was the same way with his wife. The kind of guy who'd just suffocate you with jealousy, even over nothing. Wolfgang thought for a second, then suggested punching him if the jealous guy deserved it. He knows from bitter experience that the kid'll fall in line eventually. Aisha still couldn't figure out what that meant, but the Duke just strolled off, whistling a tune. Then Betty, the maid, came up to the little girl and told her it was lunchtime. Aisha's stomach rumbled at the mention of food, but first she needed to take care of something. She still had one unanswered question about her fiancé, so she immediately took off to catch up with him as he strolled along a separate path. The little girl called out to him, but the boy pretended not to hear her, didn't even flinch. Aisha was already getting annoyed with his behavior, especially since she practically groveled when she apologized yesterday. And now she couldn't shake the Duke's advice to, persuade him if nothing else worked. All the pent-up feelings she had were just fueling that urge even more. Still, the girl didn't want to come off as some total jerk, get blamed for stuff later. So, making up an excuse about Levi having a mosquito on his back, she smacked him hard. The shockwave from that slap rippled out, scaring the crap out of some birds in a nearby nest. And now, Levi had a perfect hand-shaped imprint blazing red on his back. But when she asked if it hurt, even a little, he totally denied it. That threw Aisha for a loop, and then bam! The kid grabs her hand, and he's dragging her deeper into the woods, not saying a damn word. The girl's mind just went straight to worst-case scenario, total freak-out mode. But then they came out to this clearing, with this killer view of the lake and the snowy peaks. It was so freaking gorgeous that Aisha couldn't think about anything else in that moment. But she realized Levi brought her here on purpose, to show her this beauty. Without waiting for an answer, the kid took off towards the lake, where she then stuck her hand in the water and felt the nice coolness. But then Levi grabbed her and pulled her away from the water, telling her to be careful. Then he let her go, but the girl then grabbed his hand and pulled him back. She wanted to know if he was still jealous, and Levi pretended he didn't know what she meant. Aisha clarified that it started when she said she wanted to see Franz. The guy remembered that moment again and realized that was jealousy, especially since Aisha's saying it, and he can't not believe her. And she decided to explain a little that married couples sometimes have their disagreements. But whatever, keeping quiet and running away? That's just wrong. Then she asked him to imagine she was suddenly mad at him. How would he feel if she clammed up and didn't want to be around him? Without even thinking, Levi admitted he wouldn't like that at all. And he realized that's exactly how Aisha felt when he was avoiding her. After that, he promised he'd never do something like that again. And his bride promised she wouldn't try to push his buttons on purpose anymore. They sealed their truce with a pinky swear and got ready to head back. Their first marital spat was over, and Aisha just had to win over Franz now. But even before they got back to the estate, something terrible happened. These monsters, huge as hell, just popped up and started attacking this little patch of land. Aisha even started thinking someone put a curse on her getting hitched. Not long before, they were driving through this beautiful forest clearing, and right before they were about to stop again, Aisha dozed off on Levy's shoulder. The coachman was handling the horses, so the carriage barely even bumped along. Then the girl felt a chill and woke up. She saw Benjamin in front of her, who explained they'd just passed through the gates. Realizing they'd arrived, Aisha stuck her head out the window to see what was up. Bastion Manor looked like a little fortress, with clean streets and tidy houses. The girl had thought this place would be way different from everywhere else. Turns out it was all pretty normal, people just living their everyday lives. But then, in an instant, the whole vibe shifted. Because suddenly, hovering over the houses, was this massive monster head with a fiery mane and 5 eyes. Aisha saw that thing and screamed so loud her hair stood on end. She was about to tell her father-in-law, but he was just sitting there, cool as a cucumber. Stumbling over her words and pointing at the window, she tried to explain there were monsters outside, and that freak show was getting closer, about to swallow that woman and her kid whole. Scared for them, the little girl started yelling for the Duke to save them. But nobody even flinched. Aisha couldn't figure out why nobody gave a damn about those two. Just then, the woman pointed the pitchfork she was holding right at it. And then she clocked that monster so hard, it did a freaking barrel roll in the air. To say Aisha was shocked would be a massive understatement. She was speechless and frozen stiff. Levi was even starting to worry she'd slipped into some kind of coma. But that's Bastion for you, where people know how to handle themselves, adults and kids alike. A little later, the carriage pulled up to the Bastion Palace, which looked surprisingly modest. Aisha stepped out onto the crunchy snow that covered the grounds. But inside the courtyard, almost everything was cleared, and the servants were already lined up to greet their masters. And the headmaid, Eva, stepped forward to give the welcoming speech. The Duke had heard rumors that Franz was under the weather, and Eva confirmed he still wasn't feeling himself. But right now, Wolfgang's planning to join the Kasich door on the wall. These guys are monster hunters, and the wall's a barrier to keep the monsters from spreading. Levi explained all that to Aisha, and she was surprised how smart he was. Just then, the headmaid came over to the girl to get acquainted. After introducing herself, she confessed she'd heard a lot of good things about Aisha, and promised to take care of her comfort while the little one was visiting. Something about that put the girl on edge, especially the maid's tone. Ava spoke like Aisha would be leaving this place real soon. But right now, realizing the guest was tired from her travels, she offered to draw her a bath. And thinking she was just imagining things, Aisha asked Levi to walk her to her room. The boy agreed and said he'd show her around the house a little on the way. And as they crossed the massive hall, Franz was spying on them from the upper floor. He ducked behind a pillar, not wanting to be spotted. Aisha was taking it all in. Everything here seemed interesting to her. And suddenly, she noticed something on the second floor, like a shadow flitting by. She also heard footsteps. Franz realized he'd been seen and decided to bolt. Later, the girl was enjoying a hot bath, something she'd really missed on the road. They gave her the nicest room, and her dinner with Levi was delicious. And now, this hot water was making every cell in her body relax. Betty bustled around and offered to rinse the suds from her hair, which Aisha accepted. What really threw her off was why the maid was holding a bucket of water right now. In an instant, all the freezing water from that bucket splashed right over the girl's head. The poor kid instantly started shivering. Her teeth were chattering like crazy. Even the maid was surprised the water in the bucket was so cold. She immediately wrapped Aisha in a blanket and carried her to her room to stoke up the fireplace. Sitting the girl in front of the fire, Betty kept apologizing for not checking the water before dumping it, and she promised to deal with whoever prepped it. But the little girl told her not to worry about it. Then, looking out the window, Aisha saw huge snowflakes falling, and it was getting even colder outside. She was worried about the Duke, who was on duty at the wall in this weather. And he probably won't be back until he's sure the monsters aren't trying to get past the wall. The little girl wanted to ask Betty more, but she started yawning, exhaustion kicking in. So the maid got her changed into some comfy pajamas and told her to get some sleep. A minute later, the little girl was snuggled under a warm, fluffy blanket, ready for sweet dreams. The crackling fire in the fireplace helped her drift off fast, and the little one was out like a light, barely managing to shove her fist under the pillow. A little while later, the maid showed up in the doorway, her face hidden in shadow. She was carrying a bucket of cold water, which she splashed into the fireplace, and the warm fire went out almost instantly. The maid glared angrily at the sleeping girl and muttered under her breath about how much she disliked that little miss. Before long, Aisha started shivering from the cold, even under the warm blanket. She was dreaming about her past life, about being just as small as she is now. Her dad was walking away from her, and she tried to call out to him, but she just couldn't. When her dad didn't come back for a long time, she started asking her grandma about him, and the old woman just mumbled that the guy was a real piece of work. The girl didn't get why her grandma was talking about her dad like that. And then she saw her grandma standing over her, and she was freezing cold. The little one got sick and had the chills, but she could feel the old woman's hands reaching for her. That's when it got so scary that Aisha woke up screaming. Betty was already there. She knew the little one was having a nightmare and came to wake her up. She also said that the fireplace had gone out, but she'd gotten it going again. She blamed herself for it, thinking she hadn't stoked the fire enough. But the kid wasn't mad. She knows everyone screws up sometimes. Then she asked me to get her ready, 'cause she's hitting the mess hall with Levi. Almost an hour later, the girl met him in the hallway where he was waiting, and those icky feelings from her nightmare just vanished in an instant. After saying hi, she asked him how he slept last night. She didn't spill about the bad dream, but she did tell him what she was thinking about yesterday. Aisha suggested they go visit Franz, and Levi got hit with that jealous feeling again. But it'll just be a friendly visit, 'cause the little one heard he's sick and stuck in his room. The girl just doesn't want him to feel all alone while he's under the weather. Levi was still on the fence, so she guilt-tripped him, saying he didn't even care about his brother. And hey, he's not just some random dude. He's a bastion just like Levi. Besides, Aisha wasn't planning on going to Franz alone. She suggested they go together. But then she was totally blindsided when her fiancé said she might cheat on him. Turns out, the kid was just kidding around. It was a pretty rough joke, but Aisha wasn't mad. After that, they went to chow down on some delicious local grub. And with their bellies stuffed, they took a stroll around the estate. Aisha was super happy and skipped ahead. But Levi noticed something was off. She was walking under an archway, and someone was getting ready to dump a bucket of water on her. Levi immediately yelled out to his bride so loud she practically jumped out of her skin. The next thing you know, he yanked her back and pulled her close. No time to explain right now. Aisha started asking what was up, but then she heard water pouring behind them. She looked back at the huge puddle and realized her future hubby had saved her from a total disaster. Still a little freaked out, the cutie thanked Levi for being such a hero, but she couldn't help thinking it might just be a coincidence. I mean, who dumps a bucket of water in the middle of the house? And that wasn't the last weird thing that happened. A couple times, Aisha got ambushed by crows that just seemed to pop out of nowhere, and someone kept setting traps in her path, but Levi always warned her in time. This welcome, feeling like some kind of survival game, was seriously messed up in her mind. But she gotta admit, it felt good knowing Levi was always there to save her butt. And even when they just stumbled across a mangled rat carcass, He covered his bride's eyes, not wanting her to see the gruesome sight. But the girl wasn't scared of the rat, and she told her fiancé as much. And approaching the little body, she noticed the wounds on the animal looked like it had been pulled from a trap. The girl wanted to bury the poor rat, and she reached for it. And she told Levi not to worry. Noticing he was getting anxious again, she carefully scooped up the dirt around the little corpse and stuck a twig in the ground to mark the spot. After that, she said a little prayer, hoping the creature would find peace. She definitely needed to wash her hands after all that, and Levi was going to go with her. But Aisha said no, explaining that she needed to walk alone for a bit. Truth is, she needed Levi out of the picture so she could figure out who was messing with her. Aisha was in a mood to absolutely destroy the lowlife who was pulling these stunts. The dead rat was the last straw. I mean, the poor animal didn't deserve that. She walked into the hall and found it empty. But she got a really bad feeling. And she was right to, because she stepped in a puddle of oil someone spilled. Just like you'd expect, thanks to gravity, she went flying, face-planting on the floor. The crash was so loud, Betty heard it from the next room. But when she saw the young miss sprawled out like a rug, she freaked out big time. Aisha, seeing stars, was still trying to figure out who was doing this crap to her. After a while, Aisha came to, with a killer pain in her forehead. Betty, who was on duty, rushed over and started asking how the girl was feeling. She also told her not to worry about the young duke, because he wouldn't pull pranks like that again. The little girl couldn't believe it was all the work of a little boy. Although maybe he was just jealous that she was taking up his brother and dad's time. Still, a lot of the stuff that happened was way too much for a 7-year-old to pull off, especially since he's supposed to be sick. But Betty just explained that he was faking it, and Betty reassured Aisha again that there's nothing to worry about, because the older duke really laid into him this time. The girl couldn't believe her ears. Her fiancé had actually scolded his own brother. But he is in charge of keeping things in order around the mansion when the head of the house is away. And the maid thought Levi was seriously ticked off this time, like, really angry. This was probably the first time she'd ever seen the duke lose his cool like that. Aisha decided to head straight to him, ignoring everyone telling her to rest. She felt mostly okay and asked where he was. When she found out he was in the younger duke's room, she picked up the pace. Even from the hallway, she could hear Franz yelling, insisting it wasn't his fault. She also saw a crowd of servants gathered, like they were at some kind of rally. The little ones squeezed through them to see what was going on. The brothers stood facing each other in a dark mood, practically shooting daggers with their eyes. Levi demanded, his voice like thunder, that his brother tell the truth one more time. He was out of words and didn't know how to prove he was innocent. Seeing things were about to blow up, Aisha decided to step in. She gently took her fiancé's hand and asked him to chill out. When he saw Aisha, he immediately started asking if she was okay and if she was hurt bad. The girl assured him she was fine, but then her eyes landed on Franz. The rumors were true. He really was a ridiculously good-looking dude. Aisha even caught herself staring a little too long, but Franz noticed and just smirked at her knowingly. And instead of a compliment, he called her a hideous thing who was marrying his brother. Of course, the girl wasn't going to take that kind of crap, and now the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. If she had her way, she would have decked him for the insult, but Levi stopped her. He looked at his brother like he was dirt and demanded he apologize to Aisha. The little twerp started chiming in from behind her fiancé, saying she felt bad for the ugly dude. And Levi was also demanding an apology for the harm done. He doesn't even know what he would have done to his brother if Aisha hadn't woken up. Another second and he would have jumped Franz, and now Aisha was holding him back. But her brain short-circuited again, seeing how much the boy who was going to crush her had changed, and Franz started yelling that he didn't add any fuel to the fire or set up any other traps. The kid admitted he only tossed in the rat, which just happened to get caught in the mousetrap. He's hearing about the rest for the first time. And besides, he has no reason to do something so pointless. No matter how hard he tried to justify himself, his older brother didn't believe him. Franz was lying from the start, saying he was sick just because he didn't want to see anyone. Besides, it wasn't the first time he'd faked being ill. The first time Franz lied about being sick, Dad dropped everything and raced home. He blew a major deal back then, but he rushed back to his ailing son. And now Franz, whose arrogance had completely vanished, just kept repeating that he wasn't lying. That repeating phrase was seriously starting to tick off his older brother. Seeing a fight brewing, Aisha told Levi to chill and hear his brother out first. Just then, the head maid walked up and confessed it was her fault. Everyone was surprised, especially Franz. and from the outside, it looked like she was just covering for him. But then she clarified that she hadn't taken proper care of the younger Duke, as the person in charge of the estate. And dropping to her knees, she announced she was ready to face any consequences. Levi sensed something was off and asked the head maid to stand up. But the woman stayed put. Even Franz's request didn't move her. The kid glanced at his older brother, scared he was about to lose his cool. But Levi just told his brother to play it cool until their father got back. Then, he took Aisha's hand and asked her to come with him. The girl looked back at the maid again, and she got a really bad feeling about this. And as they were almost out of sight, Franz asked Eve how she was doing. The maid, watching the girl leave, insisted that she was perfectly fine. But her mind was racing with some seriously messed up thoughts. Ever since that whole falling incident and the big blow-up, Levi hasn't left Aisha's side for a second. The girl felt kinda awkward, like he was glued to her, an extra limb she didn't ask for. But the kid was worried someone else might try to mess with her, and he didn't want her getting hurt. When they got to the room, the little one looked out the window, just trying to kill some time. Down below, she spotted a bunch of paper airplanes, probably tossed by Franz in some kind of huff. Suddenly, the little girl asked Levi what the deal was between Franz and Eva. She couldn't shake the image of how worried the boy was about her. Levi explained that after his mom passed, that woman always looked out for him. It's been almost 6 years since she died, and Eva basically raised him. Hearing that little piece of the family history, Aisha thought Franz was still being way too uptight. Still glued to the window, the little one suddenly gasped. Totally surprised, she snuggled up to Levi and explained that it was snowing again outside, right in the yard. She thought it was weird since it's summer, but she saw a silver lining too. She asked Levi to change into something warm and meet her in the garden later. Disappointment crept in real quick when she found out she couldn't go out. Betty explained that the tailor hadn't sent her warm clothes yet, so she'd have to wait. Even wrapping herself in a blanket wouldn't cut it, 'cause she's planning on playing in the garden. Besides, she just got over feeling under the weather not too long ago. The girl was super bummed she couldn't play. And then, wouldn't you know it, the maid shows up. She was holding a big bundle. It was clothes Franz had outgrown, and Aisha could wear them. Besides, the head maid suggested giving it to the kid. Aisha was surprised, and that weird feeling came back, like during that showdown. But it's just clothes, right? She hoped nothing bad would happen, and it's a good chance to go outside with Levi and have a snowball fight. Betty wasn't against it either. She was actually happy for the little one. Soon, Aisha went out to the garden, where her fiancé, bundled up, was waiting. The girl hoped he hadn't been waiting long, since it took her a while to get ready. But then she noticed his face was frozen in a weird expression, and his eyes were fixed on the cloak. He recognized Franz's clothes, and Aisha explained that she borrowed it because it was cold outside. Even so, this was the trigger that made Levi jealous all over again. I mean, he's got clothes too, and she just didn't get why the bride didn't pick him. But he kept quiet, just puffed out his pink cheeks, which only made him look even cuter. Then Aisha jumped on him and suggested they build a snowman together. They each started rolling a snowball, trying to make it as big as possible. And then Levi, being the stronger of the two, started stacking them on top of each other. For a second, Aisha even felt a little uneasy when she saw him lifting that huge ball of snow. Franz was watching the whole thing from the window, wishing he could join in the fun. A little later, Aisha fell back into the snow, totally enjoying herself. Suddenly, she felt a weird stinging sensation in her right leg. She grabbed her leg, and Levi was right there, worried, asking if she was okay. Worried she was hurt, he started pulling off her boot to make sure she wasn't wounded. But it turned out the bandages were just stuck to her skin because of the snow. That's what was causing the burning. The kiddo immediately reassured her fiancé that it wasn't a big deal. But he didn't buy it, and scooping her up in his arms, he decided to carry her inside. Betty was surprised the kids were back so soon, but then she saw the state they were in, and she nearly jumped out of her skin, terrified that Aisha was hurt. The little one kept insisting that they were overreacting. However, a little later, she wasn't so sure it was just a minor thing. They poured water on it to loosen the bandage, and it started burning like crazy. Benjamin took care of the treatment, while Betty stood by, lamenting that the kids hadn't been careful. She couldn't figure out how snow even got inside the boot in the first place. And as she was checking it out, just being curious, she noticed something was off about it. Her face twisted up so weird in that moment. Aisha got spooked, and Levi got his guard up. Usually, winter boots are waterproof. They've got like a wax coating or something. But this one doesn't. It's like someone deliberately got rid of it and sent it to the girl. Levi's first thought was his brother, since these were his clothes. But Aisha stopped him right there, saying she had a genius idea. Thinking it through, she realized that whoever's behind all this is someone who could easily pin all the blame on Franz. And all the clues pointed to one person. It could only be Eva. Having figured that out, she suggested Levi do something. The kid agreed right away, without even asking what his bride was planning. He just trusted her, and that made her heart race like crazy, yet again. The next day, the head maid was hanging the Duke's clothes on a mannequin. Then she suddenly hugged it and started whispering sweet nothings, pretending it was Wolfgang. That old bat had a thing for the head of the family and was hoping he'd get back soon. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the door made her jump out of her skin, 'cause she could get caught. Luckily, she'd locked the door beforehand and just huffed, annoyed that someone was interrupting her daydreaming. Levi and Aisha were waiting for her outside, all dressed up and in high spirits. Eva politely asked what the little miss wanted with her, and she said she wanted to go play with Levi in the annex. The maid refused, saying the Bastion's treasures were guarded there, and it wasn't a place for games. But the little girl was super curious. She even agreed to let Eve come with them. After another refusal, she declared that she'd still marry Levi, and the keys to that place would be hers. The head maid swallowed hard, a knot forming in her throat, and reminded her that Mrs. held the keys. But Aisha pointed out that she wasn't here, and Eve was just temporarily guarding them, because she wasn't Mrs., just a regular maid, even if she was the head one. That stung Eve, but she kept quiet, just giving the little girl a piercing look. And she'd have to obey, since she could end up getting chewed out by the Duke himself. After a short walk, they approached a small building with massive doors. While Eve fiddled with the lock, Aisha asked if Levi came here often. He shook his head like, "No way." And then they saw what was inside. It was crammed with so much treasure, it was insane. The girl was totally geeking out, checking everything out. Spotting another locked door, she begged Eva to open that one too. The next room looked more like some kind of massive tomb. It was loaded with bling, which Aisha was absolutely losing her mind over. The head maid stuck to the kids like glue, especially keeping an eye on the girl. That's when Aisha put her plan into action, telling Levi she'd dropped something back the way they came. So, she asked him to go back and find it for her. Levi took off like a shot to do whatever his future wife wanted, and the girl kept looking around, saying how awesome this place was. On one of the shelves, she spotted a ruby bigger than her hand and reached for it. But just then, the maid smacked her reaching hand right away. The kid turned around and glared at the offender, who calmly apologized, said she didn't want the child messing with a priceless family heirloom. Aisha apologized too, saying it was just so beautiful she couldn't help herself. And then she went on about how it was like all the treasure in the world was right there. What she liked most was this crazy sword and a ruby the size of her fist. Then she admitted she actually liked the aunt, who acted like a stepmother, even though she wasn't. The kid's words stung the maid, and she was about to fire back. But then Levi showed up and reported he hadn't found anything, even after searching everywhere, and Aisha apologized to him, explaining that she was probably mistaken. The kid touched his hand, and he noticed a bruise on her wrist. He started to worry that now her hand was injured too. Then she asked him to carry her, because her leg was a little sore, and Levi immediately gave her a piggyback ride. As they left, Aisha yelled to Eva that they were heading out and she could lock everything up. On the way back, the kids started thinking about the situation again. Everything pointed to Eva taking advantage of the owner's absence and pinning the blame on Franz, and now she can't figure out why the boy values that woman so much. Getting into a conversation with Levi, she learned that he definitely doesn't like Eva, and she was surprised, because she thought he cared about that woman. Levi only kept his hands off her because his little brother's got a thing for her, and Aisha decided to spill the beans, saying she suspected Eva was behind everything. When she laid out all the details, Levi went ballistic and was ready to take her down. But the kid told him to hold his horses, because they didn't have any proof yet. But once they did have proof, they could make that lowlife suffer however they wanted. The girl was already looking forward to seeing the look on that jerk's face later. The next day, Aisha was still lost in some sweet dream, when yelling started echoing from the hallway, waking her up. And then the door burst open, with practically all the mansion's servants standing there. And leading the pack was Eva, and she apologized for the noise with a smile. The girl, still half asleep, didn't even bother to scold them. Covering a smirk with her hand, she asked what all the commotion was about so early. Of course, the girl already knew, but she played it innocent. And the head maid reported that a relic had gone missing from the annex. She also pointed the finger at Aisha as the prime suspect. The girl just chuckled, knowing what was coming next. Eve ordered the servants to search the room, and they scattered like cockroaches. Betty practically turned blue with indignation, not understanding how they could accuse such a sweet creature. But Aisha told her not to worry, then whispered for her to go get Levi. Betty didn't get why, but she agreed to do as she asked. While she was gone, the kid watched the search and thought, "Man, they should clean this thoroughly all the time." One of the maids, searching under the rug, actually found the ruby. Eve even smirked, thinking she could finally get rid of the brat. But the kid pretended to be caught, all while giggling like crazy. Eve gave her this "Are you for real?" look, figuring she'd lost it out in the cold. Just then, Levi walked in and immediately went to Aisha. And she started whining about how they found the jewel and she didn't know what to do. Levi just calmly said it wasn't a problem and she could always take it to play with. The little one tried so hard to look worried, reminding him it was valuable, and Eve would be mad. Betty realized the head maid was going to chew the little one out. The girl nodded, adding that it hurt so bad she almost cried a little. That's why Levi secretly brought her the ruby and offered to play with it. She glanced at her fiancé, and he confirmed every word she said. Meanwhile, the maid who found the ruby was clutching it, happy to hold it even for a moment. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her, and turning around, she saw Aisha's disgruntled face. And without a word, Aisha smacked her hand so hard the jewel slipped from her grasp. The maid didn't understand what she'd done wrong, because she hadn't done anything. And Aisha explained that you can't just touch it like that, or Eva will scold you just like she did. Everyone realized then that the head maid had hit the young lady, and that's a serious offense. Then the little girl picked up the ruby and apologized to Eva for them taking it. She begged her to take it back, but the other girl just silently cursed her out. Aisha kept saying the jewel was as beautiful as Levi's eyes. That's why she liked it so much. Then he wiped away a fake tear from her cheek and told her not to cry. And again, in front of everyone, he declared that everything in the bastion belonged to her too. The other maids chimed in, saying Aisha would be the lady of the house and could take whatever she wanted from there. Everyone was happy now, except for Eva, who was standing in the corner fuming. The little girl agreed with everyone, but still decided to put the jewel back where it belonged. Then she held it out to Eva again and asked her not to mess around and to put her thing back. Words can't describe what she was feeling. Contempt, hatred, and the desire to just disappear. At that moment, all that was left to do was obey the little girl's order. Once everyone cleared out, Aisha sprawled on the bed, stoked to finally chill. Only Levi stuck around, and he thought she was just out of this world, because everything played out exactly how she called it, even Eva trying to frame her and make her look bad. And since they went to the annex, it gave them a chance to lie about the theft. And at the end of her master plan, Aisha's killer cuteness will seal the deal. Then Betty came back in, all worked up about how Eva treated the kid, and she was ready to go give her a piece of her mind. But the little one stopped her. Though that's important too. First they need to get Franz out of Eva's clutches, because he's the real victim here, and Aisha's ready to stand up for her family. Her next move was to expose Eva's true colors to everyone. So, since the head maid called the kid a thief, she decided to actually steal something. Before long, Aisha was tearing around the courtyard with the Duke's coat, the one Eva was slaving over. She was having such a blast that Franz heard her from inside. He wasn't alone. The head maid was giving him another lecture, telling him how to talk to that girl, to quickly put her in her place, though she admitted that the more she watched Aisha, the more she reminded her of the late mistress. Franz was listening to the maid, but he felt something completely different, and he missed his mom too. Suddenly, Aisha outside started shouting Eva's name, but the boy didn't dare go look. But the head maid was intrigued and leaned in closer to the window, all wide-eyed. Whatever she saw in there drained the color from her face, then turned her green, and she just froze, stiff with terror. Aisha was waving that coat around, calling for Eve to come out and play. Spotting the nanny's horrified look, Franz peeked out too and saw his dad's clothes on the girl. He turned around when he heard dishes clattering. Eve was shaking so bad she dropped a cup. The kid even started to worry about her. That tea was scalding hot. He went to take her hands to check on her, but she immediately smacked his wrist. Then she got up, her face all twisted up, like she was about to let him have it. But she didn't say a word, just left the room with this jerky, nervous walk. Franz, rubbing his hand, figured Eve was just super upset, since she usually doesn't hit him. And for a while, he wandered around the room, trying to convince himself that Eve just made a mistake. He remembered how bummed he was when he heard his dad and brother had to leave the estate. Levi had to get back to the academy, and the Duke was going to be swamped. But Wolfgang was hoping his youngest son could handle things on his own. Eve watched the whole goodbye scene from the sidelines, and a nasty little plan started brewing in her head. And as the Duke was leaving his son's room, she was already set to slip in another dose of, well, trouble. Then she'd whine to Franz about how his own family had abandoned him, babying him like he was a real orphan, the whole 9 yards. The kid argued back, insisting his dad just left for a bit because he had work. And Eve started feeding him that line again, about how he wasn't like the rest of the Bastian family, saying he was too soft and the Duke left him behind, just using work as an excuse. It'll be a real pain if Franz kicks the bucket, even with all his faults. The kid figured if he lied about being sick again, Dad would show up. But one time he pulled that stunt. His dad missed out on a major deal, and my brother had to handle the whole initiation ceremony by himself. So ever since then, whenever Franz says he's sick, nobody believes him. They always tell him not to lie like he did back then. But this time, the kid was actually telling the truth for once. Now, he's bummed that the people closest to him can't even trust him. And that day, while Aisha grabbed the coat, Eva was tearing back to her room like a bat out of hell. She practically kicked the door open, hoping she was wrong. But all that was in the corner was a naked mannequin, and her prized possession was gone. The head maid was so freaked out, she nearly passed out right there. She stumbled back like she was in a daze, and ran into Aisha and the other maids on the way. The little girl was thanking them for playing so well, clutching that jacket to her chest. Eva spoke to the girl, but her eyes were glued to that piece of clothing. And then, out of nowhere, she went to slap the kid for taking it. Franz stopped her just in time, telling her to chill out and get herself patched up first. Aisha was actually surprised the Wicked Witch got hurt. Usually those types are invincible. But then Eva dropped to her knees in front of the little girl and begged for the jacket back. The girl was confused, because she thought she could have whatever she wanted in the house. So, Eve explained that it was a really important item the Duke himself had given her. He'd asked her to accept it as an apology for the whole mix-up this morning, and this coat is super precious to Eve as a keepsake, which is why she's asking for it back. But the little one could have sworn she really did grab it from her father-in-law's closet. One of the maids immediately jumped in to back her up, confirming they'd picked it out together. The little lady had asked them to find some clothes she could play dress-up with. The maid herself was barely holding it together, trying not to crack up laughing, and Eve got this total déjà vu feeling, like she was stuck in another morning of complete misunderstandings. She was starting to lose it when Aisha called out to her and showed her another coat. It was the very one the head maid had been searching for. The kid explained the clothes were just lying under the window, must have fallen. She was even surprised that neat freak Eva hadn't noticed something so small. Then she tossed the coat at her, implying she was losing it and should retire. After that, the little one turned to Franz, asking if he liked sweets. They're about to chow down on cookies, and she decided to invite him too. They were celebrating a job well done with cookies and tea. Betty was tasked with hiding the clothes, and she nailed it. Suddenly, Aisha noticed Franz hadn't even touched the sweets and was looking sour. So she started teasing him, saying he needed to be spoon-fed like a baby. Then she grabbed a cookie and shoved it in his mouth so fast he didn't even blink. But then he pulls this thing out and announces that all the Bastions hate sweets. Aisha was a little shocked by that, but she noticed he was still holding the treat. Still, she got curious about who came up with such a dumb rule. Franz didn't answer. He looked at the cookie again and felt like he just had to have it. Then, in one swift move, he chucked it in his mouth, bit off a piece, and started chewing. Levi watched the expressions change on his face and asked how it was. He nodded, since he couldn't talk with his mouth full. But everyone could tell he really liked it and regretted not trying it sooner. For a while, the kids enjoyed eating sweets and chatting happily. And then Aisha decided to ask Franz a question that was important to her. He was saying that Eve was behind all the dirty tricks, not just the rat thing. The kid was like, "How'd you know that, Aisha?" And she's all, "Girl intuition." She realized Franz wasn't trying to be a jerk. He just wanted some attention. The girl explained she'd seen lots of little kittens who didn't get any love, just like him. He got a little ticked off at being compared to a kitten and snapped, "Well, you're like a puppy." Aisha didn't argue. She thought of herself as a cute little puppy too. But getting back to the main thing, the girl just couldn't wrap her head around it. Why, after all the headmaid's shenanigans, did Franz still like her? He confirmed that, yeah, he really did have feelings for her. But then his hand started shaking, and he confessed he couldn't be around her anymore. If Eve's happy, she's happy, and if she's sad, she's sad. But if she gets hurt, then it hurts both of them. Aisha explained that he feels this way because of their deep connection. And if she really cared about him, she wouldn't drag him into her mess. Suddenly, Levi stood up, like he was about to say something important. And this is actually a big deal. He apologized to his brother for not believing him. Levi called him a liar because he didn't want to go through those feelings again. In that moment, he was feeling rage and resentment. But neither he nor their dad showed Franz their anger. Because, on top of everything else, they were worried about him. He's family. That's when Levi stroked his brother's head, and he just broke down crying. He didn't want to show his tears, but they just kept spilling out, the little traitor. And as if the humiliation wasn't enough, he started sniffling like crazy. Levi would have teased him any other time, but he knew what those tears meant. After Franz calmed down a little, he actually suggested telling their dad everything. Aisha loved that idea. Her eyes lit up like Christmas. And she suggested leaving Eve a nasty surprise before they left. Franz got curious and asked her to spill the beans. Aisha's new sneaky plan was called hide and seek. There was nothing special about Eve Manji. Her looks and background were totally average. Her family went bankrupt, and they sold her off to the Bastion family as a servant. From day one, she kept her head down and acted humble. She treated the master with respect, mostly because she was scared stiff. See, the Bastions are dukes, and they say they got the devil's blood in them. They always took girls with the blood of gods as companions, no matter where they came from. And once Eve found that out, she started dreaming that maybe she still had a shot. But one day, while she was rubbing his feet, her dreams and plans went up in smoke. Duke Wolfgang dragged in some girl from who knows where, wearing a dark veil over her whole face. This woman, who actually made the master laugh, became the Lady of Bastion. Eve hated Katrin, and she got even angrier when Aish Mani showed up. The headmaid was hoping she finally had another shot, but it all slipped away again. She'd waited so damn long, but the little miss hogged all the attention. That's why the villainess plotted to get rid of her, even off her if she had to. Stewing in her room, still pissed, she heard a knock at the door. She asked who was there, but got no answer, and figured she imagined it. But the knock came again, so Eve grabbed a kerosene lamp and went to see who was bugging her. She yanked the door open, ready to tear into some punk kids. But the hallway was empty, and a chill ran down Eve's spine. Still, she pressed on, trying not to let the creeping fear get to her. Then, out of nowhere, the lamp in her hand went out, even though there wasn't a breeze. A web of fear and dread started to spin around her. Then, from the far dark corner, came some kind of weird scraping sound. Ava felt her ankles start to tremble, and thought about turning back. Just then, someone grabbed her arm, and her guts clenched up. Carefully turning her eyes in that direction, she saw it was just Franz, except he was way too urgently warning her not to go there, saying it was a trap. But Eva wasn't listening to him. She was focused on his eyes, which, in this light, looked just like his mother's eyes. Those same eyes behind the mask, the ones she always hated. Ava's emotions exploded, and she swung at the boy, yelling at him to stop looking at her. Nobody could stop her, and after the hit, the kid went flying backwards, flipping over the railing. All he could manage was a pathetic groan, his face a mask of pure, unbelievable terror. Realizing what she'd done, the maid immediately lunged after him, hoping to grab him. For a split second, a flicker of hope flashed in the boy's eyes. But it was gone in an instant. Something just snapped in Eve's head, and she pulled her hand back. Tears burst from the boy's eyes as he fell, hanging in the air for a moment, following him down. But then, for some reason, he wasn't scared anymore. He just felt himself sinking into the abyss. Eve, narrowing her eyes, started looking around, checking if anyone had seen her wicked deed. Seeing no one, she decided to take a look at the boy's body. Just then, she heard a rustling sound, like someone was standing right behind her. But nobody was there, and she realized the sounds were coming from below. Leaning over, she saw the servants had caught Franz in a blanket, but they were still worried. Then, in the next instant, Aisha's voice echoed behind her, like a bad omen. The little one came with Levi and some knights, demanding an explanation. Ava swore it was a mistake, that she was completely innocent. But Aisha didn't think pushing a kid off a railing and watching him fall was a simple mistake. She declared that Franz had given her one last chance, and she blew it big time. Ava's gaze fell on Levi, who looked like he wanted to tear her apart with his bare hands. He really did, but instead he ordered the knights to take the villainess to the dungeon. A little later, Franz was curled up in a ball in his blanket on the bed, like a little caterpillar. And that's when I realized all women are terrifying and can't be trusted. Aisha, who came to check on him with Levi, got all riled up, saying she's a woman too. But Franz didn't see her that way. To him, she's the sweetest sister-in-law in the world. Totally charmed by the compliment, the little one told him not to worry, because he has such an amazing family. And that's when he asked where Aisha's family was. That question caught the girl off guard, because she couldn't say anything about her parents. But she got out of it by saying she has a husband, and he's her family. Then Franz clarified that wasn't what he meant at all. This time, Benjamin saved the girl from answering, running up to check on the kids. He heard the news, but didn't get why they hadn't said anything sooner. Anyway, it's all done and dusted. And then Aisha suddenly asked him to identify that frock coat. Benjamin just glanced at it and said without a doubt that it belonged to the Duke. The one he wore 6 years ago at Catherine's funeral. The kid was surprised he remembered details from so long ago. And then she said that Ava had kept that coat the whole time, to which the assistant added that the Duke himself had covered the maid with it back then. The girl's brain short-circuited again, because it sounded more like a love scene. And while she was trying to sort things out in her head, Levi heard something. There was a noise coming from the street, which Aisha then heard too. It was getting louder and louder, and the kids rushed to the window to see what was going on. Monsters ambushed us out of nowhere, and everyone geared up for a fight. Levi noticed there were way more freaks this time than usual. Usually, we only get like 10 tops, but this looked like a whole damn army. Levi immediately called for a knight and ordered him to bring his sword. His little brother was just as fearless and told them to grab his bow. Realizing they were gonna go fight those monsters, the girls started freaking out. The guys knew it was super risky, but they couldn't just sit at home and do nothing. They're bastions, after all, and gotta protect their people from these monster attacks. That's when Aisha announced she was going with them, 'cause she's a bastion too. For some reason, Levi didn't argue. He hoisted her onto his back and got ready to swing his sword. The monsters were closing in fast, and the knights were the first to take the hit. Levi started hacking away at the creatures, while his girl hung on tight. She couldn't help but compliment him on his awesome fighting skills. He just kept checking if she was okay, and she felt all right. Even with the nasty stink that made you want to hurl and bugs everywhere, Levi suggested she head back inside and chill for a bit. But then things got even hairier, and the noise got even worse. A flying monster showed up, and this thing was known to be seriously dangerous. And it wasn't just flying around the city, it was hovering right over those kids. Then Aisha suddenly heard a voice, begging for something, but she couldn't make out what. Trying to listen closely, the kid was mesmerized by the hideous dragon. It looked like it was speeding in from the edge of the sky, heading straight for her. And then she heard a clear voice saying someone wanted to see something. Everything stopped in an instant when Levi chopped the dragon's head off, and it crashed to the ground. Then Aisha found out that Levi had heard the same thing she did. Turns out it was the monster talking. She'd never seen anything like that before. And then another huge green monster face popped up right next to her. But Levi managed to dodge it so Aisha wouldn't get hurt, and he jammed his sword through the monster's heart over his shoulder. That was taken care of quickly. Plus, it turned out to be kind of small. Betty, who was fighting with a battle axe, wondered why monsters like these had shown up today. And Levi figured that's why there was a free spot in the lineup. After all, they threw everyone who was in on it with Eva into the slammer. More monsters, fewer people. That's why the pressure's cranked up. All of a sudden, Aisha needed to know where the underground prison was, and Betty tipped her off that it's near the wine cellar. The kid decided to bust some people out of there so they could join the fight. But Levi asked his bride to stay, 'cause he can't protect her if he's not by her side. His worry got to Aisha, but she promised she'd be back in a flash. Besides, she wants to protect her fiancé just as much as he wants to protect her. After talking Levi into it, the kid and Betty headed for the underground prison. But then the monsters started catching up, so Betty scooped up Aisha to run faster. They managed to shake him off and, zigzagging around, finally made it to the spot. Betty told her which bottle opened the secret door and stayed behind to keep watch. The kid scrambled down into the cool room, where she started hunting through all the bottles for the one with the red label. She found it pretty quick and twisted it the right way. There was this nasty screech, and suddenly it smelled like damp basement and rot. Right there in front of Aisha, gates to an underground prison swung open, like a whole other world. Trying to ignore the stink, the little one bravely stepped forward. There in one of the cells, slumped against the wall, was Eva, pale as a ghost. But the second she saw Aisha, she perked right up and lunged for her, trying to grab her through the bars. Turns out, the kid wasn't there for her, but for the others, telling them the outside was crawling with monsters. And she suggested they come out peacefully and help fight. Otherwise, they'd have to answer to the Duke himself. People knew the kind of unpleasantness that guy was capable of, so one by one they started agreeing. But then there was a problem with the lock, and someone pointed out a finger-sized hole. Said you had to stick your finger in there and turn it until it clicked. The grateful, freed people rushed outside, promising to help with the monsters. Aisha was now free to leave herself, when a skinny hand reached out behind her. It grabbed the girl's dress, pulled her to the floor, and started dragging her. Eva held her tight, ranting that the boss would never forgive Aisha for treating her like this. The kid tried to break free, but the wicked witch was way stronger. Plus, she was slipping all over the moldy, damp floor. Then, out of nowhere, a huge ruby fell out of that nasty woman's sleeve. Eva freaked, worried she'd lost the jewel that could have made her rich. And the girl just despised the evildoer even more now. The ruby rolled right to Aisha's hands, and she snatched it up, yelling that it wasn't Eva's, but the boss's. Then she smacked the criminal right in the nose with it, telling her to choke on it. The blow knocked the wind out of the wicked woman, and she released the girl. Her carcass hit the floor, and Aisha was thrilled she'd gotten away, since she almost kicked the bucket. The ruby didn't come off Eve's face easily, leaving a faceted imprint behind. Betty was already waiting for the kid outside, wondering why she was taking so long. Eve explained that some creep was hitting on her, but she took care of it. Now they can head back and help Levi Bastion. The young Duke had already wasted a bunch of monsters and was still going strong. Then they just swarmed him, cutting off his escape. He didn't have the time or the inclination to fight them one at a time. So, he geared up to crush all the freaks with one swing. They were lined up perfectly. After that, it'll be easier to deal with the monsters in the back. He was just about to swing his sword when he heard the Duke's worried voice. Approaching his son, he took down all the monsters with a single blow and asked why Levi was alone. The kid went to the front lines himself to protect Aisha, and his father praised him for making the right call. It was relatively safe here now, so Wolfgang suggested they move on. The night was clear. The stars and moon were shining bright, and the air seemed to sparkle with frost. But not too far away, the battle with the monsters was still raging, though it was nearing its end. Aisha was sent to a safer location, where she tended to the wounded. Franz stood guard at the entrance with his bow, keeping the monsters away. Suddenly, someone yelled that the master had arrived, and the girl immediately looked in that direction. Duke Bastion was heading towards her with his son, Levi. Their faces were grim, and Wolfgang took a quick look around, sizing up the situation. Then, bam! Aisha was all over him, hanging off his neck, yelling about how much she missed him. Franz ditched work too and ran over to greet his family. Later, they all headed home, and Aisha was stoked to have her father-in-law back. She locked him and Franz in a room together and told them to sort out some family business. The kid knew that mainly meant him, and he started getting nervous. Then he apologized to his dad for lying about being sick that one time. The Duke was quiet for a few seconds, like he was really thinking it over. Then he said that, yeah, that was a real screw-up. But he was glad his son brought it up himself and owned up to it. The Duke himself didn't know how to handle Franz back then. It was tough for him. The kid would laugh, then get angry. He loved people, but felt so alone. It's not very Bastion-like. But the Duke asked his son to state his full name. The boy thought it was weird, but he gave his first and last name. Still, he really wanted to be a Bastion like his dad and brother. The Duke chuckled at that and admitted he was actually glad Franz was different, because that made him a lot like his mom, who Wolfgang loved very much. And no matter how she acted, Katrin was still a Bastion. Now the boy understood that they didn't have to be the same. They were family. Meanwhile, outside the door, Aisha was grilling Levi about how it went. But then the door burst open. The Duke stepped out and realized those two were eavesdropping. The girl got nervous, but explained it was all for the sake of peace in the family. And Levi peeked into the room and saw Franz jumping for joy that his father called him Bastion. Wolfgang could have stayed longer with the kids, but he still had something else to take care of. He headed to the underground prison, where the dim light barely illuminated Eve's bruised face. She sat there, staring at the floor. when suddenly she saw familiar boots in front of her, and she looked up with eyes swollen and puffy to see if she was just imagining things. The master stood before her, completely expressionless, and she hoped this was her rescue. In the next instant, she pressed her battered face against the bars, expecting to be released. But then the Duke's face changed, and he demanded to know why he had appointed her headmaid. Ava was confused, and Wolfgang explained that above all, Franz felt comfortable with her. That's why she was useful, even though she was completely rotten inside. But now she dared to hurt his child, which is even worse than hitting him himself. Ava started swearing she hadn't done anything bad to Franz, but the Duke wasn't talking about that. He has 3 children, and 2 of them suffered emotional and physical trauma because of her. Wolfgang declared that she was fired, and Ava felt like the sky was falling on her. She still begged him to change his mind, since she was the one looking after the young master. The Duke didn't want to talk to the villainess anymore and asked Benjamin to take care of her. Then he left, and Ava kept reaching out to him and begging for forgiveness. And Benjamin, putting on his gloves, told her to get ready to suffer just like the young master. The next morning, Eva got kicked out of the estate, and the Duke sent the rest of the maids to Aisha. Later, the girl got the guts to ask him about what was going on with Eva, and Wolfgang explained that he only covered her with his coat, so Franz, who she was holding, wouldn't get cold. Aisha calmed down. Plus, she got a set of keys that only the lady of the house can have. For a second, she even thought that if she got mad enough, she'd swipe a ruby and bolt. Then Betty called her over and told her that the tailor had delivered some new clothes. But the most important thing, her wedding dress finally arrived. So, it was decided that the wedding with Levi would be held the very next day. The night flew by, and on the wedding day, Levi was waiting for his bride to get ready. And when she came out of the tent, she looked like a little goddess. She was that beautiful. The kid was still sweating it, wondering if Aisha really wanted to get married in such a small-time place. But the little lady had already told him, like 100 times, that everything was cool. Besides, she was the one who wanted to get hitched in Bastion, where she'd be living from now on. And it was going to be the most special ceremony in Aisha's life. Though, she wouldn't complain if Levi wanted a bigger venue. The kid shot back right away, saying he loved whatever his bride was into. After that, the little lady took his hands and suggested they head to the waiting room. She had to hang back for a bit, since Levi was supposed to walk down the aisle first. Aisha stayed behind with the Duke, who was clearly a nervous wreck. And then he remembered that during their first meeting, she'd declared that her future husband was in Bastion. It struck him as weird, but he figured he'd humor her for a bit, then ditch her. But now he realized the kid was telling the truth, and he'd actually gotten used to her. Wolfgang's even happy things worked out the way she wanted. The girl agreed with him, but she blushed a little, because all of this really does feel like some amazing dream. Suddenly remembering everything she'd been through, she even wondered what happened to the real Aisha. You could guess she was sacrificed as some kind of holy figure when she was little. But whatever happened to her, the kid hoped she went to a good place, so she, the one who took her place, would feel less guilty. Then she asked Wolfgang to say something to her, as his brand new bride. He was at a loss for words and just asked how she was doing. The girl happily chirped that everything was great, and she knew things would be even better at Bastion. It was time for her to head to the altar, so the Duke suggested they get going. Aisha was feeling super anxious, even more than most brides usually do. Benjamin, when he saw her, totally teared up with joy. Her mom even made it to the celebration. All the estate residents were there as guests, showering her path with rose petals. And there, a little further ahead, Levi Bastion was eagerly waiting for her. As soon as Aisha saw him, she bolted forward, but stepped on the edge of her dress and almost ate it. Luckily, the Duke caught her just in time and figured it'd be better to carry her and hand her off to his son. But she started wiggling, wanting him to put her down, sure she could walk on her own. Wolfgang didn't argue, not wanting her to throw a fit, and set her down. The happy little thing started walking, but realized no one was following. Turning around to Levi, she asked why he was just standing there. She spun so fast, she tripped over her dress again and felt herself falling backwards. But her fiancé caught her just in time, so she didn't get hurt. Still holding her, he admitted that she looked absolutely stunning today and apologized for not telling her sooner. Then he let her stand on her own, and Aisha promised to make him happy, and that she'd do everything she could to make sure he didn't regret his choice. Levi didn't doubt that for a second, even if she hadn't said a thing. Aisha was totally wiped after the wedding ceremony. Since the wedding was thrown together so fast, only family from out of town could make it. It was still a huge crowd. But Levi cheered her up, saying she handled it like a pro. The girl gave her husband a mysterious look for a few seconds. Then, super excited, she suggested they go to the wall together tomorrow. But Levi didn't get why she'd want to go to that shady wall with the stunt performers, where it's super dangerous. But hey, she's officially a Bastion now, on paper and all, and she wants to check it out. Besides, Levi will be right there to protect her if anything goes down. The kids didn't tell anyone about what they'd heard on the day of the attack. If they'd revealed they heard the monster's voice without proof, they might have been branded as, well, let's just say, troublemakers. Levi's a demon's descendant, so no surprise he heard it. But how could a saint hear that? And worst case scenario, they'd just execute her. Suddenly, Levi stared silently at Aisha, like he wanted to say something, but was too shy. Then, he suggested kissing her, but the girl clearly wasn't ready for that. Even though they're married, and Levi didn't think it was weird, especially since Aisha seemed down, and he wanted to cheer her up somehow. Still confused, the girl saw him leaning in, but stopped him at the last second. Just then, the Duke walked in with Frains, and was a little shocked by what he saw, and Aisha got even more scared. Wolfgang then explained that their marriage was just a formality, so they could just head to their separate rooms. And Franz noticed his brother's flushed face, and worried he was coming down with something. To ease the tension, Aisha suggested we all crash here together, since it's a long trek back to our rooms. Her suggestion just threw the Duke for a loop, and she even winked. Levi was the first to volunteer, scooting closer to his wife, which left Wolfgang with no choice but to stick around too. And so, Aisha's first night as a married woman went down. Bright and early the next morning, they were scheduled to head to the Shadow Wall. For the girl, it was kind of a trip, and Betty was totally digging it. She wished them good luck, telling them to be careful and stay out of trouble. Then, everyone piled into the carriage, and 4 horses hauled them out of the estate. The girl noticed people were giving them weird looks, but it's all because of the ceremony. Word on the street is there's a new lord and lady in town, so everyone's all kinds of curious. And the little one decided to say hi to some folks who were giving them the serious eyeballs. She popped her head out the window, flashed a sweet smile, and people practically melted. They politely greeted the young lady, who waved back at them like a little queen. Franz noticed the girl was enjoying it, and she straight up told him he was just jealous. Things got a little tense there for a second, 'cause Aisha totally zinged him. But they didn't actually fight, and the rest of the ride was pretty chill. After a while, with the carriage rocking back and forth, Aisha drifted off to sleep, head on Levi's shoulder. Then bam! A super loud noise, and the little one jumped like she'd been electrocuted. The Duke figured it was a monster, but he kept his cool like a stone-cold pro. Monsters ain't nothing when you got 3 bastions here. No way any beast can touch 'em. The veteran knights were the first to charge at the monster. Aisha could hear screams and the monster's nasty roars from outside, and it was freaking her out. That's when the stunt squad showed up and took care of the problem, quick. They rolled up to the wall just as Levi was helping his wife down from the carriage. But the second her feet hit the ground, cheers erupted all around them. The stunt squad gave a deep bow, welcoming their new bosses. Aisha greeted the protectors and introduced herself as Aisha Bastion, which she was actually proud of now. And that's when the guys looked up and saw what a total doll they were dealing with. To these huge dudes, she probably looked more like an adorable puppy with those big, innocent eyes. But her eyes went wide because she thought she could hear their thoughts. Then they started reaching out, wanting to ask the little miss questions. The most eager one stepped up first, since he didn't look as scary as the others. The rest really did look more like giant gorillas, but they were all charmed by this little girl, who gathered her courage and declared that she wouldn't be scared of them next time. That blunt honesty kinda shocked the fighters, but nobody took offense. On the contrary, they were happy that such a cute little thing was talking to them. That decent-looking warrior offered to escort her to the ruins and hurry back. It's relatively safe there, and the girl agreed. The knight went first, then Levi, and Aisha followed behind. The further she went, the more this place gave her the creeps. Plus, climbing up the rocks was kicking her butt. Levi noticed she was barely moving and reached out his hand to help. That help was exactly what she needed right then, and Aisha thanked him. Soon enough, they reached the top, where the knight was celebrating like he'd just won the Super Bowl. But the girl wasn't feeling it. Every muscle in her body was screaming. Then she saw this weird sphere shimmering with dark colors. This is the wall? Aisha thought it was strange, because it didn't look like any wall she'd ever seen. Then she asked if it wasn't dangerous guarding it so close. But these were seasoned warriors. the bedrock and shield of the whole empire. What's more, they're part of the Bastion, so no threat can touch them. The knight looked all proud and pleased after that speech, but Aisha was still blown away. Still, she couldn't argue. Those guys were seriously badass. In the end, they had to cut the wall inspection short so they wouldn't get in the stunt team's way. They all cheerfully waved goodbye to their masters, wishing them a good and safe journey. Aisha was actually glad she got to see the little monsters there, even though she was freaked out at the time. She just wanted to hear that voice again. But there was nothing. The girl figured it was for the best, when suddenly she caught a whiff of blood, and the little one got scared that something awful had happened at the mansion. Soon their carriage pulled up to the estate gates. But when they got out, they got this bad feeling, like, where the heck is everybody? Aisha got to the house first and reached for the doorknob. But Betty yanked it open, looking totally beat. Inside, people were covered in what looked like, stuff, and they started freaking out, trying to clean it all up. Betty started begging them to wait outside for a bit and was about to shut the door. But her legs just gave out, and she collapsed right at their feet. Aisha peeked through the crack in the door, and it looked like some kind of twisted Halloween party in there. The servants were actually planning a party like that, to celebrate the newlyweds. But then, out of nowhere, some masked guys busted into the house, and the plan to give Levi some good memories before he left went completely to pieces. It just hit Aisha that she's gonna be all alone, and it's gonna suck. While Levi was comforting her, Ben asked the Duke for a word. The aide figured out these guys were hired guns from the royal family. He even found a little vial of poison in the kitchen as proof. It's not exactly poison, but this stuff causes infertility, especially in young women. The Duke saw this wedding gift as a straight-up declaration of war. Since they sent him a present like that, he wanted to return the favor. But he wouldn't use assassins. If he stooped to their level, they'd only get bolder. Wolfgang, with a wicked grin, decided to show the royal family what real kindness looked like. There's this crystal fountain in the imperial palace, super valuable, and the Duke was plotting to destroy what His Majesty holds most dear. Benjamin felt a knot in his stomach. Looks like he'd be pulling overtime. The party still happened, and afterwards, Aisha asked the Duke to tell her about the Bastion, and he confessed he'd assign her a special tutor who could answer every single question she had. The girl was expecting some old professor, but it turned out to be Benjamin Cooper. Aisha was even surprised that her father-in-law acknowledged him as a special tutor. He brought a decent amount of books with him, so many he was sweating from the weight. Since the girl wants to learn more about the Bastion, these were mostly history books. But the real kicker is that Aisha has to study all of this by the end of the day. 5 hours later, the little kid was so tired, the letters were swimming in front of her eyes. And Benjamin kept checking in, asking how much footage she'd already gotten, like he didn't even notice the girl was practically falling asleep. Then the assistant started talking about Jose Bastian, the monster slayer, and how the stuntmen became an official organization with way stricter rules. Aisha remembered reading about Jose and how much he hated monsters. Because during the monster surge, he lost his fiancée when he was really young. She hadn't dealt with that herself yet. But the truth is, monsters were even killing kids. Aisha also caught herself feeling weird whenever she remembered that voice. It fills her with this longing and bitterness, like the voice is conveying feelings a monster shouldn't have. Getting back to the story, Aisha learned that the leader, Jose, died pretty young. Plus, he didn't have any heirs, so his younger brother took his place. Jose couldn't remarry, because he could never forget his bride. Benjamin explained that the reason was because he's a Bastion. Then he noticed Levi peeking in and decided to wrap up the lesson. He just asked Aisha if she enjoyed today's session before they left, and the girl honestly admitted that she felt pretty powerless. Still, it just made her admire him more, since Bastions never give up, no matter what. Now she was overflowing with joy that she could have some fun with her husband. Benjamin watched them go, wishing those two could stay kids a little longer. At the same time, he admired Aisha, who managed to become an equal member of the Bastion family. Levi told Aisha he'd packed everything, since he was leaving tonight, though he could totally stick around a couple more days, if his lady wanted him to, but she asked him to head out early to make sure he got there safe. But after thinking about it, and how she wanted to spend more time with him, she suggested he leave tomorrow instead. Aisha kept thinking back to that tragic love story, and she didn't want Levi to love her like that. Not if Bastion love was so reckless. But right now, she was giving him a sweet smile and keeping the mood light. And they strolled around outside till sunset, just soaking each other in. At dinner, Aisha suggested they all sleep together again tonight, before Levi left. This time, Franz wasn't feeling it, saying they're not kids, and the girl asked anyone who refused to raise their hand. Nobody did. But Aisha noticed that Franz was actually eating his veggies today. His plate was empty real quick, actually. Meanwhile, the Duke and Levi hadn't even touched their vegetables. The younger Duke then declared he was just like his mom. That's why he was different from the rest. And Catherine loved both veggies and sweets. At the mention of the late Duchess, Wolfgang suddenly felt under the weather. Aisha even got worried about him. But he remembered something about his wife for a second. It was back when Catherine was still alive, and he hadn't eaten his carrots. Naturally, his wife gave him a hard time about not finishing the healthiest thing on his plate. The Duke just wasn't feeling it, and his wife immediately got ticked off. I mean, if the head of the family's a picky eater, how are the kids ever gonna learn to eat right? Kartina shut her mouth and just waited for her hubby to choke down those little bits of veggie. But seeing that words weren't getting through to him, she gave him a good, solid thwack on the head. She always popped Wolfgang one when he refused his veggies or dessert. After dinner, when Aisha had already gone to bed, there was a knock. With her okay, the Duke and the boys came in to wish her good night. The little one was lying there, all wrapped up in her blanket, with a sad look on her face. But the boys were starting to suspect this chick was up to something, again. I mean, she was pushing for everyone to sleep together for the sake of family bonding. Turns out, it was all tied to the Bastion's magic. Suddenly, Aisha jumped up and said she'd overlooked something super important. She hadn't visited her mother-in-law yet, and as a good daughter-in-law, she needed to pay her respects at the grave. But Franz, looking away, quietly disagreed. At first, she thought he was just against it, but that wasn't it at all. Apparently, Catherine didn't have a grave, which the girl thought was really weird. The room went silent for a couple of seconds, like nobody wanted to talk about it. Finally, the Duke explained that it had to be that way. The Duchess was cremated, and her ashes scattered immediately after the funeral, according to her will. But that still wasn't enough for Aisha. She at least wanted to know where her ashes were scattered. Wolfgang told the kid not to sweat it, because she didn't have to go. But she was totally set on it, almost at the point of freaking out. Even her brothers got worried, not understanding why she was so obsessed. Aisha, innocent as she is, thinks she's a fortress, but she knows she's not. That's why she got even more attached. And then she heard about Katrine, and figured that a foreigner like her wouldn't even get a grave. The girl couldn't wrap her head around not having a grave, even if it was in the will. She huddled up tighter and tighter until Levi uncovered one edge so she wouldn't suffocate. The kid had super sad eyes, but she said she was just tired and wanted to sleep. Levi knew something was definitely up, though. With one swift move, he shook the blanket, sending Aisha tumbling out like a sack of potatoes. But he really just wanted to smooth it out, lie down next to her, and share the covers. Then, he whispered softly in her ear that he'd do everything exactly the way she wanted. Aisha was flattered by his attempts to butter her up and his eagerness to please her in every way. But she started to wonder why he only said what he thought she wanted to hear. The boy's answer was simple: because he was really into her. Just then, the Duke yanked the blanket off them, worried they were getting into something they shouldn't. Then, he clarified that they had both decided to get married, not just date. Backing up his dad, Franz dove onto the bed between Levi and Aisha, promising to stay there for a while. But then the little girl grabbed Wolfgang's hand and yanked him down towards her in one swift motion. He lost his balance and tumbled down near the kids, and Aisha felt a surge of happiness, seeing them all together like a real family. The Duke still felt a little awkward, but his daughter-in-law assured him he'd get used to it soon enough. And they all spent the night together again, kinda watching over each other while they slept. That same night, Aisha had a really bizarre dream. It was like she'd become a mother, but instead of normal kids, she had 2 eggs, one black and one white. To her, it felt both totally weird and completely natural at the same time. Then these eggs started swirling around her in the air, taking turns calling her Mom. Suddenly, Levi appeared behind her, looking totally calm. Pointing to the bouncing eggs, he assured her that they really were their kids. But looking at his wife's confused face, he realized she didn't remember anything. Leaning in close, he started whispering about what they'd been up to in the attic. The whisper sounded so messed up, Aisha woke up screaming her head off. After calming down a little, she tried to figure out what that crazy dream about eggs was all about. She wanted to talk it over with Levi, but found she was all alone in bed. The girl bolted out of the room like a shot, just in her nightgown and slippers. She ran into Betty, who got all worried seeing the little miss in such a state. Aisha explained she was looking for Levi, and the maid confessed he'd already left. The young master hit the road at the crack of dawn. Just didn't want to wake his wife. He'd never seen her sleeping so soundly, and he told everyone else not to disturb her either. Aisha was still bummed though, 'cause he just took off without even saying goodbye. But then Betty pulled out an envelope that Levi had asked her to give to his girl. The kid ripped open the envelope like crazy, having no clue what it could say. Levi promised her he'd ace the next exams, no doubt about it. And he also wrote that he missed her like crazy and was always thinking about her. And while her young hubby was away, Franz agreed to tutor his sister-in-law in etiquette, starting with how to hold a cup gently, not grip it like a vice. But the girl's hands were shaking, because this young tutor was talking so fiercely, like some kind of wild animal, even though she was the one who wanted to learn etiquette a couple of days before. She first told the Duke about it, saying she didn't want to be looked down on anymore, because she's not just anybody now, she's a bastion, so she has to live up to it. She even managed to find herself a teacher, Franz, who himself just found out. The kid made a face, but Aisha cut him off and asked him to help out. How could the Duke refuse? Especially if she gets 90 points from Franz. Wolfgang will give her a gift, but he didn't say what it would be. The girl, now totally fired up, declared that she'd definitely get the score she needed. It sounded bold, but in reality, it was harder than she thought. I mean, just to drink tea, you gotta hold the cup. Just so and straighten your back and posture. Aisha felt like it'd be faster to just obliterate the whole concept of tea ceremonies worldwide. The maids were trying to encourage her, saying that she was already spilling fewer crumbs from the cookies. You can barely even hear her put it down, though everyone knows that's just because of the street noise. And get this, they wouldn't even let Aisha peek outside to see what all the ruckus was about. So time flew by with fun times and hard studying, until one autumn day. This was a big day, because Aisha finally mastered all the rules of tea time. Franz, being the teacher, checked every time to make sure she held the cup right and didn't slurp. And when she finished, the kid gave her 1 point, and she thought he was messing with her. But she just didn't hear right. Franz was giving her 91 points. Words can't describe how happy the girl was. After going through that kind of survival school, what made her happiest was that now she could get a gift from her father-in-law. Franz tried to stop her, since they weren't done yet, but she was already gone. Arriving in the study, Aisha was bummed, because the Duke couldn't give her a gift. Of course, the girl started kicking up a fuss. She'd been through hell, after all, and the Duke asked her to wait an hour, which wasn't really that long for her. While she was waiting, Aisha saw a maid outside the window, wearing a blood-stained apron and dragging someone by the scruff of their neck. The kid realized the mercenaries were up to their usual dirty work again, and she told the Duke that she wished she knew how to protect herself too. Wolfgang didn't see the point, since there were plenty of people around to protect her. The girl argued back, saying anything could happen, and she wouldn't be able to do a thing. After thinking for a bit, the Duke agreed that she had a point. And dipping his pen in ink, he decided it was time to call on someone. Someone they hadn't spoken to in a long time. Baroness Maine. He shared this thought with Aisha, but she couldn't figure out why it had to be her mom. Just then, Benjamin walked in and reported to the Duke that everything was set. Wolfgang was already looking forward to this moment and offered his sister-in-law his hand, inviting her to come with him, and she'd finally get her present. The little one was stoked. Her imagination was running wild about what it could even be, but they blindfolded her on the way since it was a surprise. And to keep Aisha from falling, the Duke carried her the whole way, which she didn't exactly hate. She figured it had to be something huge. That's why they were keeping it under wraps. Soon, Wolfgang set her down, and she smelled grass. When they took off the blindfold, the first thing she saw was green leaves. But then she saw the huge greenhouse, everything sparkling like crystal. The girl was totally blown away, her eyes darting around. She was beyond thrilled. But she was surprised it was built so fast, 'cause a structure like this takes way more time. The Duke himself picked out everything here, from the design to the materials. He confessed he was going to give it to his wife 6 years ago for her birthday. But the funeral happened first, and the whole project got abandoned. That's how Aisha learned that Catherine loved flowers and, well, everything alive. The girl even wanted to give the woman props, but, kinda impossible. But she can thank her father-in-law, and bowed to him practically to the floor, saying she was super happy to get such a gift, and she was sure Catherine would say the same. The Duke was hit with a wave of emotions. He even thought for a second his wife was wandering the gardens. But he knew it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. Snapping back to reality, he was just happy the little one liked her gift. A month later, after Aisha got the greenhouse as a present, winter snuck up on them. The kid was fighting the cold every day, still not used to the freezing temperatures. One day, priests from the Holy Nation came to visit. That definitely threw her for a loop. But she decided to go see what was up. She wrapped herself in a blanket like a mummy, so her nose wouldn't freeze off on the way. Plus, she didn't want to show her face, remembering those priests from before. Betty thought her behavior was a little weird, since Aisha usually wasn't shy about showing off how gorgeous she was. But she couldn't admit she was terrified of getting caught again and shipped straight back to the temple. That's why she made up that excuse, and was even kinda glad it was cold. Stepping onto the upper platform, she spotted 5 priests down below. Every year, the Holy Nation sends priests and knights here for support. She remembered the servants talking about it, and they weren't exactly thrilled. They figured the priests just show up every year and do nothing but eat their food, which meant more cooking, and then cleaning up after them, so the servants hated them. But they can't refuse them because of the High Priest's seal. Legend says Noir had the bastion, and Lumiere had the line of high priests, which eventually became known as the Holy Nation. Lumiere planted a single tree there, right in the richest soil. That sprout grew super fast and became known as the World Tree. Then, Lumiere pointed to one kid and made him the guardian of the tree, and he became the first priest of the sacred nation to come. The story's been kept alive to this day, thanks to the Hakate document. Priests are born when the 5 leaves bloom, and all the priests revered that. So when Aisha, who wasn't even from a priest's family, had 5 leaves bloom at her birth, it caused a huge uproar. Still up there, Aisha didn't want to come down and just wanted them to get lost already. Betty explained that normally they stick around until the full moon, which is still 2 weeks away. The girl's mood just tanked. There's no way she can hide for that long. And in that moment, she really missed Levi, who wasn't coming back anytime soon either. She waited for the full moon, barely able to contain herself, and headed to the greenhouse. The golden roses, which had only been buds before, were now in full bloom. The girl was ecstatic, so grateful to the Duke for such an amazing gift. Aisha couldn't wait for Levi to arrive, so he could see this beauty too. But then Betty, looking embarrassed, confessed that the young master would be delayed because of the weather. Levi was already packed and ready to go, but there was an obstacle on the usual route. There was a massive amount of snow this year, and the shortest path was blocked. This bummed the kid out, because he was already missing Aisha like crazy. But there was a solution, because he didn't have just any horse. Ignite could totally fly over the obstacle. Levi even promised him 50 more carrots than usual for this. The horse was happy about the reward, of course, but he also knew his master was missing someone. And pushing off hard with his hooves, he took a flying leap. Meanwhile, Aisha stayed glued to the window, longing for her husband. Whenever Franz saw her like that, he even worried her forehead would freeze to the glass. But the girl wanted to see him the second he came into view. Franz missed his brother too, but he understood better that it all depended on the weather. Still, he stood next to Aisha, just to give her some support. 4 days passed like that. And finally, Levi arrived on his steed. Aisha and Franz were the first to run out to meet him and nearly crushed him with hugs. They were so stoked and happy to see him, they piled on and ended up tumbling into a snowdrift together. Levi looked from one to the other, and he'd never seen them looking so damn happy before. He was feeling pretty good himself, finally being back with his family. A little later, Aisha led Levi to the greenhouse, but she kept his eyes covered the whole way. It wasn't until they were inside, and the warm, flowery scent hit his nose, that she let him open his eyes and see the amazing structure. Levi looked around, but this place felt familiar, like he remembered it somehow. And while Aisha was having a blast, showing him the golden rose and the other flowers, the kid felt a pang in his chest, not because the place reminded him of his mom, but because it was a gift for Aisha. Last time the gift didn't work out, and it ended in disaster. Levi didn't want anything terrible to happen to this little one either. He walked up to her with such a serious look that Aisha got all worried. But he didn't admit his fear, because he wanted to believe she'd be with him forever. Soon, the Baroness arrived, the one in charge of Aisha's physical training. Sometimes, especially when she had to haul logs while keeping perfect posture, she almost regretted her wish. A couple of days before, at dinner, the Duke reminded her how she'd asked to learn to defend herself. First, Wolfgang asked what kind of weapon she'd like to use. The girl thought about it. She'd somehow skipped over that part of her wish, and the Duke suggested a whip, believing it would be a very good fit for such a little thing. And just a couple days later, she was lugging a log around, and there wasn't even a whip in sight. But the Baroness was saying that any skill starts with physical conditioning. After a few laps, Aisha collapsed on the floor, dropping the log, and couldn't even get up. Seeing that Aisha was really wiped out, Maine decided to call it quits for the day. She's not a monster after all. But there would be more tomorrow, which sounded like a threat to the girl. The brothers felt for Aisha, especially Levi, knowing how tough it was for her. And she was practically sobbing, because now she wouldn't even be able to go on a date with him. Right on cue, Franz needled her, saying it was just an excuse to skip training. But no one's really forcing her. She could always just bail on the whole thing. Aisha was more worried that Levi would be leaving again soon. He has to study at the academy for 10 years. Levi's only done 2 years of schooling, which means 8 more to go, and it's killing her. After Aisha recovered a bit, she was hanging out with the guys. They noticed someone showed up and started peeking around the corner. Some aristocrat came to see the Duke, and you could tell by his tone, his offer was garbage. He wanted to lure Aisha away under the guise of education, but the Duke said she had no interest in that. The aristocrat was straight up fuming that Bastian rejected the offer. I mean, this was a recommendation from Her Imperial Majesty herself. This chubby dude in a ridiculous feathered hat tried every angle to get a deal. But the further the conversation went, the more Wolfgang lost his cool. And then the aristocrat threatened that something unfortunate might happen to Levi's marriage certificate. He'd heard they hadn't even looked at his case at the Imperial Palace yet. Every aristocrat has to submit their marriage certificate to the palace for approval. And it's only considered legit if it's got the Emperor's seal on it. Hearing that fat jerk's threats, Aisha realized she still wasn't officially a Bastion. The girl actually shuddered when Levi covered her ears, so she wouldn't hear the bad news. He was sure everything would be fine, and told her to ignore that slimeball. The girl wished his words would come true, but she knew how harsh things really were, and she was super worried they might not accept their marriage at the palace, the same place she died before. So she decided she wouldn't give up, and would do everything to make sure their marriage was accepted. And with a sudden burst, she ran towards the Duke and his guest. Wolfgang was about ready to toss him out by the scruff of his neck, and then she just blurts out that she agrees to this guy's offer. The Duke was floored by that. I mean, she doesn't even know what it is. All she knew was it was an offer for her, and it was her choice to take it or leave it. Then she asked the fedora-wearing dude to hand over the document he was offering her father-in-law. But he started getting all puffed up, saying she's just a baroness from some backwater province. Plus, she doesn't know any manners, and he's practically disgusted to even talk to her. That's when her brothers stepped up, giving him the one more word and you're toast look. So the aristocrat just unfolds the document himself and starts reading. Turns out, Her Majesty issued a decree for Aisha Bastian to enroll in Leo Academy. Aisha freaked out big time when she heard the academy's name. Later, the Duke called a family meeting, but the girl was a nervous wreck. She was practically tearing her hair out, not understanding how this happened. But it was already decided. Nothing she could do about it. She'd have to live with it. Looking at her brothers, though, they didn't seem to mind her going to the academy at all. Benjamin was even praising the place. He and the Duke himself were alumni. All the Bastian family dukes graduated from Leo Academy. The competition to get in is always insane, like a total bloodbath. Otherwise, it's just a regular school where students hang out and make friends. Though some don't, like Levi, he doesn't have any friends. Aisha still couldn't figure out why the Empress would send her to the academy. Benjamin tried to explain it gently, but the Duke just flat out called her a psycho. The poor kid practically jumped out of her skin, wondering if he should even say that out loud. And then she found out the Empress isn't the Emperor's actual mother. She raised him like he was her own, and now he always does whatever she wants. But being a good mom to your kids doesn't mean you're a good person to everyone else. As Empress, she's definitely got the respect she's earned. That's for sure. But she's a real piece of work, and it's anyone's guess why she wants Aisha to study. Trying to figure out what's going on in her head is harder than any class they could throw at me. After hearing all that, Aisha was really hoping she'd never have to meet her. But then the girl noticed everyone staring at her. Turns out, the royal family can only write a letter of recommendation once a year. And it's the ultimate stroke of luck, and the greatest honor for whoever gets it. So, since Aisha got this kind of gift, she's got to show some gratitude to Her Majesty. The other option is just tear up the letter, and the girl wasn't about to do that. Before heading to the Imperial Palace, Aisha spent her time training for combat. She also dedicated a lot of time to learning etiquette. Time flew by, and now she's riding in a carriage to the palace. She stayed silent for the long ride. She really didn't want to see that woman anyway. She even thought about just jumping out of the carriage and disappearing into the woods where nobody could find her. But there's someone out there even more worried than Aisha is. Crown Prince Mercedes Giovanni August Diamanta, Aisha's ex-husband and the male lead in Lotus in the Mud. He's been married before, but he was young. Plus there's another main female character in the picture. Aisha never stopped hoping, not for a second, that everything would be okay. Glancing at her husband, she poked him and proudly declared that she was only his, which meant he belonged only to her too, and he wasn't about to argue with that. When they arrived, the girl reluctantly climbed down from the carriage with a heavy sigh, and there it was, stretching out before her, the opulent imperial palace. Inside, a servant greeted her and her family to escort them to the audience hall. Aisha stopped short in front of the massive red doors with gold trim. Beyond them was the emperor, the guy she was supposed to meet in the story. She was actually getting curious about what he looked like in real life, not just in the book. And when they got closer to him, they respectfully took a knee. The girl managed to get a quick look at him, and it didn't feel like he was really an emperor. But then, after a servant whispered something, he yelled that his mother was expecting the guests, and the young Duke and Duchess Bastian were sent from the hall to meet Her Majesty. A servant met them in the corridor to lead them to the Empress in the garden. But the girl still thought it was weird how indecisive the Emperor seemed. Her Majesty proudly folded her hands in front of her neck and hummed some tune. A bunch of maids stood nearby, ready to jump at her every whim. And every one of them was shaking, because word had gotten around about Her Majesty's temper, especially since she was practically bursting with impatience for her guests to arrive. She was dying to see those kids with her own eyes, the ones who are so different. The Bastions were getting closer to the Empress's crystal palace. It looked so incredible that Aisha's jaw practically hit the floor. Almost everything here was made of crystal, and the girl couldn't even imagine how much it was all worth. But now she understood the Queen's power. Even the flowers and statues sparkle here. But then she saw broken fountains and got confused. It gave off a seriously creepy vibe, and Aisha was even afraid to go any further. The Empress was practically bouncing in her seat, itching for the guests to arrive. Her eyes were all squinty like always, so nobody could see her. Issue. Then this ancient servant shuffles up and announces the guests are here. Next thing you know, they're ushering the kids up to Her Majesty, and she greets them all politely. Aisha gave her respects too, just like she was taught. And you gotta finish the greeting by wishing for the blessings of Lumet, naturally. The Empress introduced herself as Ingrid, so Aisha gave her name too. Ingrid peeled off her glove and held out her hand to the kids, saying she'd been waiting for them. That meant they were supposed to kiss her hand, and Levi was the first to do it. Aisha knew she was next, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Her husband just figured she was flustered and forgot what she was supposed to do. So, he kissed Ingrid's hand himself, explaining it was on behalf of his wife. And when asked why, he said his wife's lips were only for him. That was a bold move. All the servants were in shock, and Aisha almost had a heart attack. The poor girl freaked out, collapsed on the floor, begging to be punished for such insolence. Her screaming stopped pretty quick when the Empress started laughing. Ingrid actually found the whole thing hilarious, so she wasn't mad at all. She told the younger Duchess to get up and not worry about it. And because these kids made her laugh so hard, Ingrid decided to give them a reward. They can now call her Inga or Ina, but that didn't exactly calm the girl down. Then Her Majesty invited the kids to the table, apologizing for making them stand for so long. Seizing the moment, Aisha turned to Levi and told him not to draw attention to himself, and also to keep his mouth shut, unless he wanted them to get played. They sat down at the table, but felt awkward, especially Aisha. A maid started pouring tea, and Levi gave the cup a sideways glance, like he was plotting something. Suddenly, his hand jerked, and the contents of the cup splashed all over the table. Aisha immediately grabbed her husband's hands, worried he might have burned himself on the hot liquid. Her Majesty, though, suspected the kid did it on purpose. But she didn't get mad. She just offered to have Levi go get dried off. Two maids immediately whisked him away, and Aisha was left alone with this lady. She kept telling herself it would be okay, even though her stomach was twisting into knots. The Empress sighed, relieved they were finally alone, but her voice had this creepy edge to it. Then she confessed that she'd been dying to ask Aisha something since the very beginning. The little one's mind raced, bracing for a full-on character assassination. But Ingrid just hugged her and asked if she could nibble on her cute little cheek, adding that she'd be super bummed if she said no. Knowing she was cornered, Aisha just asked her to be gentle. And as the Empress leaned in, it seriously felt like she was about to bite off half her face. To her surprise, nothing like that happened. Instead, Ingrid just started squishing her like a little doll. Then she let the kid go, noticing her terrified eyes. Once Aisha was free, she gulped down some water to calm her nerves. But she almost choked when Ingrid asked when they were planning on having kids. Judging by the girl's reaction, Ingrid figured they were having some marital issues. Just then, an aide walked up and reminded her to watch what she said, because her words could easily be taken the wrong way, if you catch my drift. After that, the Empress apologized to the young Duchess for the awkwardness, and clarified that she wasn't pushing them to have a baby right away. In fact, she'd be happy if they put it off for a good long while. Then she blurted out that Aisha could be the end of the Bastion line. The girl felt like she was being grilled and just wanted to go home already. Then the servant came in and announced that Duke Bastion was leaving the audience hall. That means it's time for Iris to take her leave too, which she was totally happy about. Levi finally got back, and the little one was going nuts waiting for him. The Empress, left alone, was still turning Aisha over in her mind. She'd love to marry off a kid like that to the prince. She even thought about tearing up those kids' marriage application. But she knew that would just be a childish whim, and not the right thing to do. And then her grandson Mercedes showed up, just back from a ride. Ingrid felt bad he was late and missed seeing such a sweet girl, because stealing Bastion's bride would have been a whole lot easier then. Now she's even a little annoyed that things turned out this way. But the prince asked Grandma not to say stuff like that, and she brushed it off as a joke, complaining that young people are way too serious. Then she added that the Leo Academy is about to write its most epic chapter in a long time. They'll have 3 members of the Bastion family studying there at the same time. But also, the prince, who Ingrid's super proud of, is starting his studies there too. But right now, she needed to wrap up one more important thing. After all, she made a promise and stamped some kind of document. Now she's sure those kids are gonna remember their school days for a long, long time. Aisha got home and just collapsed on the bed, totally wiped out. She told Betty all about what happened and how scared she was, like scared stiff. Then, out of nowhere, Benjamin shows up and says it's no time to be lazing around in bed. See, before she gets into the academy, Aisha's got to learn to play a musical instrument. The kid wasn't feeling it, so she asked if she could swap it out for singing. She even belted out the local anthem to prove she's got the pipes for it. But then he remembered she's from the temple. Just keeps slipping his mind because of how she acts. Still, he was impressed, because singing's part of the academy's curriculum too. After that, the little one could finally crash and flopped back on the bed. She tossed and turned for a while. Couldn't shake the recent stuff out of her head, especially the way Benjamin brought up her being from the temple. She actually got curious about how the other kids were doing, especially Tom, the one who helped her escape that awful place. It felt like ages ago to Aisha now, and she felt a little guilty that she was the only one of those kids living a good life. But the main thing is, she's alive, and now she needs to hang in there. After a while, Duke Bastion's carriage arrived at the academy gates. People started whispering that the Duke's second son was enrolling, and some girl with a letter from the Empress. But the students got out of the carriage in a unique way. Levi was dragging Aisha, who wouldn't stop complaining. And since the Duke himself and his second son were right behind them, nobody dared to snicker at the scene. Turns out, Benjamin's little running carriage test was finally catching up with her. Aisha wasn't just feeling a little under the weather. She looked like death warmed over. But then people started whispering that she'd been sick since birth and didn't have much time left. To shut those rumors down fast, the little one asked Levi to put her down. But he stubbornly kept carrying her, worried sick about her health. And then the Duke grabbed her and literally ripped her off of Levi like a stubborn barnacle. He thought they were getting a little too friendly, so he broke it up. An announcement went out for all the new students to head to the auditorium. Only Franz and Aisha went, and the hall just seemed absolutely massive to her. After they sat down, she could feel the sharp eyes of the other students all around her. She knew they were curious, since she got a recommendation letter. And she's also the Duke's wife. Next up, the director, who's also kind of the academy's mascot, a lion guy, took the stage. This short, kind of chubby dude introduced himself as Molly Holika. Aisha thought he seemed like a pretty good-natured guy. But then he hit us with a serious warning. This ain't no party, it's time to grind. The way his eyes and voice changed so fast, it sent chills down almost everyone's spines. The kids were naturally silent out of fear, but he demanded an answer.